Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can I just welcome you? My name's Martin Tugwell. I'm the Chief Executive of Transport for the North. As this is our annual meeting, the first order of business would be the election of the chair. Can I just check with the monitoring officer how we're doing for a quorum, Julie?
Yes, thank you. At the moment, we are just slightly short of a quorum of members on numbers. So when a further representative arrives, because at that stage we may still be short on the 50% of the weighted votes, I'll advise members to resolve to suspend that. For the time being, can I suggest that the meeting proceeds as a Chief Executive's consultation call until that point in the meeting, and if necessary, the appointment of chair and vice chairs can be deferred till a little later in the meeting.
Can I just check with the meeting, are people content to proceed on that basis?
Yes.
Okay. I would ask that, as I have got Lorne McLaughlin here as the chair of TFN, can I ask...
Thank you, Martin, and welcome everybody to our first meeting or consultation, as we have to technically do for a short time. We've got quite a lot of things we want to get through this morning in reports, and I know there's a number of items that people want to raise. It is worth noting that we have started the consultation on the Strategic Transport Plan. That is undergoing, and I'll ask Katie a bit later on to say a few words about how that is going and the way in which we're doing the consultation. It will come back to us in September, and confirmation is planned for the December meeting, I think is the timetable at the moment as far as that is concerned. So I have to ask if there are any declarations of interest. We still need to do that even though we're on the consultation call, I think, just to be in the clear. Has anybody got anything they wish to declare? No? Fine, thank you very much indeed. Minutes of the previous meeting. I think we've got an absentee. We've got somebody mentioned in the minutes, but he's not down on those present. So Mark will make sure that's put right as far as those present is concerned. Thank you for pointing that out to me a little earlier on. Martin, are there any other items out the minutes? Actions from the minutes.
Chair, in terms of any actions arising from it, you've got a number of items on the agenda which I think cover those issues, and it's whether you wanted to pick up on the point you wanted about the Strategic Transport Plan.
Yeah, I think it might be worth having a bit of a report on that at this stage, because it's not actually on the agenda later on. But Katie, can you just let us know where we're doing and how that's going, and if anyone's got any points, please raise them.
Thank you, Chair. So really pleased to have launched the consultation on the Strategic Transport Plan following the Board's consideration of the draft at its meeting in March. We made a couple of minor tweaks based on the Board's feedback before we went live, specifically just making sure it was very clear it was transport for the North, not just in the North, and also recognising the free ports as well across the region. And there are various other points the Board made which we were addressing as we progressed through the consultation. And as the Chair said, our intention is to bring you a summary of that early consultation output when we get together in September, with a full report then coming to the December Board. When the consultation launched, we're doing this through a number of routes. We have an online virtual consultation room for any partners, stakeholders, the public to be able to share their views across all aspects of the plan. Myself, my team and various other colleagues across TFN are out across the region attending various events, whether that's been local authority committee meetings or partner events. And we've started our own series of TFN workshops to gather views and comments and feedback on the Strategic Transport Plan. The first of those took place here last Friday. And perhaps just to give you a small flavour of what came through, partners and stakeholders and the public were saying, be more ambitious, be more ambitious. They particularly would like to see more ambition around behaviour change that would be necessary to achieve decarbonisation, particularly around mode shift. And they were also keen to see more in there around freight and logistics and supporting those cross-regional connections. In addition to those workshops, we've got a further one planned in Leeds on the 5th of July, and the further one then again in Newcastle on the 14th of July, and we'll be wrapping up with a virtual event on the 31st of July. And as I say, interspersed with various other meetings we're at. And finally, I probably would just like to mention, and perhaps we'll cover a little bit more of this when we come back in September, is that we are now utilising Transport for the North Citizens Panel, Northern Transport Voices. This is a panel of up to 1,000 members of the public that we are using to any questions or comments. Thank you.
I was going to raise this in the matters rising from the minutes anyway, but so the Citizens' Voice, is this the same body as that referred to by Mayor Driscoll? I don't know whether he's here or not, I can't actually see, but it mentioned in the minutes in 5.6, it refers to a Citizens' Assembly.
So just to clarify, Councillor, that's Mayor Coppard's own initiative, which we'd agreed we could support if necessary to collate.
Mayor Driscoll. Yeah.
Sorry, Mayor Driscoll.
Okay,
apologies.
so two discrete.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much.
I'm sure Oliver will happily take one on as well. Okay. Thank you. Can we then move on to item 5, which is the TransPennine route upgrade? Neil's going to take us on this. Progress has been made with the Stalybridge blockade, and at the moment dealing with the Morley blockade, I think. Neil?
There we go. I'm sure that's much better. So I'm going to take a little bit of time talking about the progress we've made. There's been a huge amount of progress on this programme over the last 6 months. It's been by far our busiest 6 months with 3 major blockades. And I would say the programme is now at pace. We will get a little bit higher tempo, but not much. So real credit to everybody who's been out there delivering designs, delivering work on the ground to get the upgrades so far this year. So 3 major blockades, around 44 days of planned closures on the railway. Upgrade of station at Morley, very significant upgrade around Stalybridge. We'll talk a lot about that. And then some important interventions in and around Batley, which is a key element of how we deliver our largest project, W3, around Huddersfield. And just talk a little bit like Stalybridge. Well, that's by far the biggest intervention we've done so far on the route. Very significant remodelling and overhead line exercise, 26 days closure and around £25 million worth of investment just in that one blockade. And that's a key enabler for our second key output, which is electrification between Manchester, Victoria and Stalybridge. So very, very important piece of work, and it demonstrates the ability of our team to deliver high complexity, very challenging interventions on time and on budget. Next slide, please. And there's lots going on across the whole route. Our first key output was diversionary routes. So it's 3 key diversionary routes, Calder Valley, Healy Mills and Castleford. And they allow us to keep passengers on trains and moving between Leeds, Manchester and York whilst we've got the railway closed. They're very, very key to an enabler to this programme. currently operating today. So we actually have the railway between Batley and Morley closed today, and diversionary routes are operating. And that allows us today to operate 2 trains an hour and, with a capability of 3 trains an hour. So a very important capability to keep the programme moving. Lots going on the east side of this programme as well, with the electrification between York and Church Fenton. And if you've been on that route recently, you'll see a huge amount of overhead line and work go up there. And that's just reaching maturity now, and we'll bring that into service over the next coming years. And then as you go through Huddersfield, I think that's probably, when you look at the map, it doesn't look huge on the map, but that is by far the biggest intervention in this programme. That's where we take the railway from 2 tracks to 4 tracks between Huddersfield and Ravensthorpe. Really an absolutely brand new railway with a grade separated junction, a new viaduct, new 4-track viaduct, and most importantly, our power supply goes in that area as well to power the route. So that's where we'll be investing really a very significant part of this programme. And as you go through that route just on the left-hand side towards Leeds from Manchester, you'll see we're already on the ground with it, with some really important works there. So a huge amount of mobilisation and work ongoing throughout the route, and we are certainly very happy that the teams we've got on the ground are doing a good job for us in delivering in the way that we want them to deliver. Next slide, please. So talk a little bit about passenger stakeholder awareness and feedback, and there's really 2 elements to this. The first one is there awareness of this as a mega programme for the North? And we've worked very, very hard with our talk partners to develop a PR campaign that raises awareness and gets a real key understanding for this programme. And that works in 2 different ways. There's a tactical way, which is all about, do people understand the work that's going on, the purpose of it, and why we're seeing some disruption to their journeys and challenges to their journeys because of the works that we're undertaking. And that awareness is hugely important so people can plan their journeys and be aware of it, and give us advocacy so they understand the purpose of why we're doing. But there's a much more strategic aspect, and those you may have seen some of the advertising campaigns we've got either in stations or on the internet, and that's far more about a long-term advocacy and really allowing us to recruit locally. This is a hugely important programme. We've got some pretty challenging targets to recruit locally, and I think allowing people to understand that this is not just a job, this is a career for people, helps build our social value, but actually helps us staff the programme, which is hugely important. So some of the stats in there are really excellent credit to our comms team. So actually in the north of England, the recall when you talk about this programme is actually better than HS2 now. So it is having a difference. And slightly less positively, you'll see there on the graph something called Net Promoter Score. So that's surveys we do every day when we're running blockades with the customers that are moving around. And what we've seen is a gradual reduction in our Net Promoter Score. Now, whilst it's negative, it actually reflects a broader Net Promoter Score we've seen across the railway at the moment with some of the challenges we've got around services. So while it's not specifically pertinent to TRU, it's a very, very important feedback measure for us to make sure that we're doing as much as we possibly can to ensure customers and passengers are happy with what we're doing and getting what they need. And actually we use it live, we use it to feedback. So as an example, feedback on this, we've changed some of our signage around Leeds Station just this week in order to make it easier for people to move about. So customer feedback is deeply, deeply important for us, and we certainly act on it. Next slide, please. So this is something I'm hugely proud of. So we just released our new sustainability strategy, and it's an ambitious sustainability. Really make this one of the leading programmes in the UK. And it aims to slash carbon, create thousands of jobs, generate billions of pounds in social value, and really invest and give back to communities on our route. So we call it our guiding compass, and it's 4 key elements. The first one is Northern Jobs. So we aim to create 8,000 new jobs or safeguard jobs. That's 1 apprentice for every £4 million of direct construction work. Enhanced environment. So a lot of this programme is about carbon reduction. There's 2 elements to this. So how do we reduce our carbon in terms of our construction carbon? And we work very hard both in terms of design and the way we actually do physical build to do that. Things like, fundamentally, the lowest carbon solution is actually not to build anything at all. So it links to the value proposition around having a lean and efficient design that still delivers the outcomes but without having to put lots of concrete and steel in the ground. And then the next part of this, how do we reduce carbon by getting to electrification quicker? And when this programme is fully electrified, it'll be around 250,000 tonnes of carbon per year it will reduce by. And then, as well as that, we have a target for biodiversity net gain. So how do we leave the environment in a better way than we found it? And we've got a very strong team that's already working on that, and there's huge opportunities in there. And the next one is satisfied customers. So we talked a lot about how we're listening to customers, but one of the key elements to this is step-free access, and we aim to have over 99% of all customers have step-free access to this railway, which is a really important part of that. And the last 1% is actually in a station where there's an alternative route, and it was just not value for money for us to put in a brand new access for all bridge. So it's a very, very important element of this programme to make sure everybody can use the railway. And then the last one is working with communities. So engagement of over 100,000 young people in the programme, STEM events, community engagements events, 25,000 volunteering hours. So it's what I'm trying to impress on the board is the sustainability social value element of this programme is such a deeply intrinsic part of this programme, and how we both deliver it, attract people to the programme, get advocacy for communities, and leave a real legacy for the north of England. Next slide, please. And I won't go through this, I'll let people have a look at it, but this isn't just words for us. We're already on the ground delivering programmes as we go along. There's some great examples there of sensory gardens or outdoor classrooms that we've developed as a group. And I think it also helps us build our own team. It gives team building away days. It allows people to get a real connectivity with the communities they're working in. And you know, like I've said, that this is about building not just jobs but careers. So bringing in apprentices and graduates into this programme is a hugely important part of it. And we've accelerated our apprentice programme over the last year. Also, one of the things we're developing is a TIU apprenticeship. So not just can you go and work for Network Rail or BAM or ENI or one of the other partners we work with, but can you move around the programme and develop a whole skill set about how we develop and enhance the railway. And that's something we're deeply positive about, and we're gaining real momentum on. Next slide, please. I won't go through this slightly complex slide in detail, but I think last time we spoke to this board, we had a challenge of how do we accelerate our access plan, how do we be more ambitious with our delivery. And I think we're really looking at that challenge. As we go through this year, we're baselining our plans to the next business case, which will give us a solid foundation to understand where we think we can accelerate. But the other key element of this slide, and apologies for its slight complexity, I'll somehow work out how we simplify the story of access, is that we already have a very, very ambitious plan. And we certainly would like to build advocacy around how we keep passengers moving in the context of delivering a huge amount of work on the railway. This plan is already more ambitious than some of the access plans in years that we had in NWEP. So from 2025 onwards, we're on a very, very precise sequence of blockades that effectively delivers the W3 project, the main project between Huddersfield and Ravensthorpe. And planning that in such a way that we can deliver those on schedule and get the advocacy to deliver those plans is hugely important for us. Next slide, please. And then last, in this case, a hugely important step forward this programme, and that will allow us to put our two largest projects on full target cost contracts. Deliver electric trains between Manchester and Stalybridge as we go into the middle of the decade. Integrate rolling stock into the programme. So this is a really important new element where we're working with our train operating company partners to have rolling stock as an integrated part of how we deliver this programme, learning from some of the challenges of the past so that we know we're buying the right trains, implementing the right trains and integrating them well into the infrastructure so we know when we start it will definitely deliver what we intend it to do. Embedding the new TIU New Enterprise model, that's not a very interesting phrase, but it's a very exciting part of this programme. So what does that mean? So that means bringing in all the partners into one enterprise team. So Department of Transport, the Network Rail routes, the industrial partners we work with, and the two main train operating companies we work with. And I actually run a new executive that they all sit on. And this, a hugely important way of how we create a one-team approach to developing outcomes for customers. Progress design, we're in a very important design phase, although we're doing a lot on the ground. Design is one of the keys now to us delivering two of our most complex projects. And we have a number of very important design partners who are driving that forward. But design is a key part of the next 18 months of this programme. And then last but not least, build on what we've already committed to and designed on freight. So we've already committed to and designed in W12 gauge. But as part of the next business case, we've already developed additional freight capability and capacity, and progressing that through detailed design and to final concept agreement is a really important part of how we deliver freight, which is now a really important part of the business case. So I will pause there for questions, but once again, thank you very much for inviting me to this forum.
Neil, thank you very much indeed. Can I just ask, while people are thinking of the points that they want to raise, can I just ask a couple of questions on the access and the ambition plans? If one looks at the blockades, which I fully think are right to do because of the way in which people can see the work being done, but it doesn't drag on for an inordinate amount of time. I notice that you've got sort of plans for 24, 25 and 26, sort of, and 27, a number of blockades, and then from 28 they drop dramatically. Is that because you'll have completed most of the work and the ones later on are, there isn't the opportunity as far as blockades are concerned, or is it that you haven't really started to work out what other blockades you could do that far down the track?
It's the latter, so it's what we've got planned there is W3 and E234, so the two biggest projects. There's one more really large project to come that goes on the end of those, which is the electrification between Stalybridge and Huddersfield. Because we haven't detailed designed that yet, we haven't got the detailed plan for us. So that project, we expect the access to come in from 2028 to 2031, and that effectively will fill in that space at roughly the same volume.
Okay, so there's further that might come as a result of that. And just on your apprenticeships, one apprenticeship for every £4 million of the project. How are you setting about recruiting that, and where's the training being done on those apprenticeships?
It's a real mix. So by and large, they come in through all the partners. So some with Network Rail and some of our industrial partners. We have two large alliances that are part of this programme. So they will come in through that. So they have their own apprentice work streams. The thing we're doing differently is actually how do we give people experience in more than one company? And that's something we're just agreeing with our industrial partners now. So you could come in and work for BAM, for instance, but go and get some experience with Siemens in signalling, as an example. By and large, the training is done the way that those companies do it, so either their own internal training or through the local colleges. So there's a real mix.
Anybody else want to come in with any particular points? Peter first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Neil. Welcome the update. It's very positive. The passenger services on the Trans-Pennine route are not directly relevant to South Yorkshire, but freight certainly is. And it's very welcome to see that progress is being made on this gauge clearance. South Yorkshire has 4 intermodal terminals already. It's a big growth area, and 17 rail freight terminals altogether. And concern is being expressed by the business community across the north. There's been recent discussions with TfN by the regional chambers group, just mentioning this whole issue of rail freight. So I'm pleased that TfN are all over it. I'm just reinforcing the message that TfN need to be all over it. Thank you.
Councillor Hughes?
Yeah. Thanks for the presentation. Just wanted to ask, in terms of the Stalybridge to Huddersfield section, which I hear you say is a little bit further ahead, has any initial consideration been given to temporarily relaying the 3rd and 4th tracks along that part of the route? This is an issue that came up at scrutiny committee in the last year or so, which I was was sitting at that time. I'm not familiar with whether any such idea has been incorporated into the project or considered. Thanks.
I'll get there. It's a bit like Teams. So the third track goes from Marsden to Huddersfield. That's where that section will be. At the moment, we have no plans for that. The fundamental reason for that is we just cannot get the access to start that piece of work because the access is effectively consumed with other parts of the programme. So in doing that, we would create too much stoppage on the railway. Also, our surveys is quite significant. Although there was a 4-track alignment on that section originally, it's actually effectively a full rebuild of that part of the railway in order to get the 3rd track in. So there's a very significant piece of work required to do that.
I just seek clarification, Chair. Are you saying then that there physically won't be enough space for that sort of experiment to be?
What I'm saying is we couldn't do it as a temporary measure because of the state of the railway there through our surveys. So we're going to, when we do that, we'll have to do it as a full measure, full cap 14.
Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reinforce Peter's point around freight, hugely important for the business community and economic growth for the region, just to really highlight that. The other point I wanted to make was, briefly, I'm a huge supporter of social value. I do wish, however, it would be called social and economic value because the economic impacts flow from that. Quick question, how much of expenditure is dedicated through local supply chains? Do we have that type of information?
So it's at least 25% of everything we spend, and we definitely push for a lot more than that. And then a significant amount of local employment. So we measure at 25 miles and 40 miles radius from the actual work. So a really significant local expenditure, and it's actually a lot more than that. And you're right about the economic value. Some of the numbers we've put in there about the 4.3 billion in social value across the life of the programme. So we're measuring the economic impact. And the last bit to that is we've introduced a new tool called the Wellbeing Measurement Tool, which is much more about well-being. So do people actually feel better about this programme? Are people's lives enhanced? And that's a much more sophisticated way to measure it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. On the, as freight's been touched upon, it's also hugely important for Lincolnshire because, as you can imagine, we have, certainly in my part of the world in Lincolnshire, being the traditional county of Lincolnshire, we have no motorways and we have very little dual carriageways. So the freight upgrade is hugely helpful because the more freight we can get on the railway means it's not taking up the highway and it's also less degradation of the highway that the County Council have got to then fix. So it's hugely welcome and support it fully. The only thing I would say is I know you've got investments elsewhere on the network, but try not to forget about Old Lincolnshire and the East Coast Main Line in our part of the world, because we seem to be a bit of a forgotten relation at times, but I appreciate its economies of scale.
Don't know if I should ask Rob to respond to that. Do you want to?
I probably should have declared a sort of declaration of interest, given that I'm Neil's boss and sit on the board, and that we're rail terms responsible for transparent upgrade. I can assure you the East Coast isn't forgotten. You know, we delivered 1.2 billion work, which Patrick, you commissioned in previous guises of work of modernisation on the East Coast, and with Nick Bisson and the DFT's team through the integrated rail plan, we're developing plans to create more capacity on the East Coast Main Line, both south of the bottleneck of York and Doncaster and north. And latterly, the north part is integral actually to making TRU success, because we can create more capacity across the Pennines, but that's not much use when you've still only got 2 tracks north of York.
Okay. Well, look, thank you very much, Neil, for that update. It's greatly appreciated. It's great to see the work sort of starting to move now at pace, and hopefully people are being able to see some of the benefits. It's going to be very frustrating for people as well while it is being done, but and particularly the timescale, which is an inordinate amount of timescale to get the project fully complete. And it just shows the fact that that's partly because there's been a lack of investment in the past. So seeing this investment now is very much welcome. Martin, do you just want to come in as well?
Chair, I just wanted to draw the board's the meeting's attention to the covering paper where there were a number of recommendations before the board. Our suggestion, I know it's a consultation call in the form, but I'm just looking for the support of the meeting for those recommendations, because our advice is it's really important at this stage in the project where we're starting to see things being delivered, but there's also further work to be done on the business case for TFN as a body collective to be very public about its support for this work, because I think it is at a critical stage. So just looking for the board's support for that, and also the welcoming the comments around the freight.
Okay, well, everyone seems to be, I'm taking silence as an agreement, no disagreement. Oh, right, sorry.
Hands.
I'm just trying to say to make progression a little bit quicker, could we make recommendations at this part of the meeting to be ratified when we quorum, rather than going through another debate again?
Because it's a chief exec's consultation call, it's a chief exec's decision. Chief exec can consult with the other members as well, but there's nothing further that's required in terms of that. Thanks.
Okay, fine, thank you. We'll certainly take that on board. Right, item number 6, Darren, are you going to lead on the a report on the NPR co-sponsorship?
Thanks, Chair. I'll lead on that. You've got the report in front of you. Obviously, this is something the board considered at the previous meeting. I think at that meeting, you were very clear that you wanted assurances that Transport for the North was going to have a meaningful role, recognising the added value we could bring to the NPR project and programme. So we've made it very clear to DFT partners that some of our partners have felt a bit distanced from the NPR programme, but also on a positive basis, we've actually got a model under the Rail North Partnership that has worked really well in terms of involving partners and allowing them to have access to the sort of information around the project, business cases, that sort of thing, that we can actually draw on to make this co-sponsorship arrangement work in the way that the board would like it to. I have to say DFT have responded positively to that. We proposed a couple of key actions in particular. One, that there was regular liaison between representatives from this board and ministers. And secondly, that we do use that Rail North Partnership framework to be able to share that information, particularly where there's information that has to be kept confidential, that we do it through that framework. So we put a proposition to the department. As I say, we've had some positive responses, but I'm going to ask Nick in a moment to say a few words as well. Just also, in addition to that, we've established at an officer level a set of working arrangements to support partners having greater input. That includes a monthly partner forum. We've had 2 of those so far. At the last one of those just last week, Network Rail shared a summary of all their work to date, and we're arranging some deep dive sessions following. And then finally, and very importantly, as the board would want to note, we continue to make the case for NPR in full. That is the centrepiece of the Strategic Transport Plan, as you would expect, so there's no change from that. We're also working through what a bridge would look like from the government-committed version of NPR to NPR in full. So in other words, what work could we start doing and bring forward that give us that bridge towards the vision for NPR in full. So that's the update, and if I can, Chair, I'd just like to invite Nick Bisson from the department just to say a few words.
Nick?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, David. Yes, and as David said, actually on the back of some positive engagement and a very helpful letter from Martin, I'm pleased to confirm that ministers would be very happy to sort of take a regular meeting with the Chair here and a small delegation from the board to be able to go through some of the NPR questions in more detail. I think when he was chairing the Select Committee, Minister Merriman heard some of the criticisms about engagement previously, and I think he's keen to do that. So, you know, we would look to put that in place with your agreement. And we are very, I think there's a little bit of detail to work through, but we're very happy to address the concerns about information sharing as well, and kind of how that might work. So with that, you know, I hope that's a sense that kind of we have both heard and reflected on the discussion that was had at the board last time, and that, you know, we are keen to continue working with TFN in the way that the co-sponsorship model was intended to deliver for all sides. I could say one, just if you would let me to, I could just say very briefly where we are more broadly. We're also very grateful for the work that the TFN TAME team have done in support of the current business case. Obviously, we had to reorientate that following the integrated rail plan. We are in the process of taking that through some internal testing within government. I would imagine that might be a conversation to be had in the autumn as we start to surface some of the kind of results and way forward out of that. In the meantime, actual delivery continues. So the scope that's needed for NPR is included in the Phase 2B hybrid bill proposals that are in Parliament. It is being included in TRU. Neil's now gone. We are proceeding with the work. So, for example, Darlington on the east coast, that Rob referred to earlier, and we're looking at bringing forward York and a range of other things as well. So, actually, delivery is in hand, particularly for those parts that are capable of bringing earlier passenger benefits.
Okay, thank you. And I think the Minister yesterday at
Yes.
the Transport Select Committee announced that he would respond to his own report when he was chairman of the Transport Select Committee next week. So
It did, including in respect of the recommendations on Bradford. Yes.
including the recommendations on Bradford, which will be very interesting, bearing in mind he wrote the report and he's now having to, as Minister, I don't think that's happened before, respond to his recommendations that he made and did he also at the Select Committee yesterday say that we'd have more information by the lead study by the summer recess?
Yeah.
So that's by the 25th of July.
Yes.
Good. He did.
Yes, sorry. I think you meant start of the summer recess.
Sorry?
I said I agreed start of the summer recess if that was your...
Oh, the start of the summer recess. So, okay, all right. Okay, any points on this at all? Mayor Coppard?
As you would expect, this is my regular slot to make the point about connections between Sheffield and Manchester. The sort of dire state, frankly, of the network, albeit improving, hopefully. Again, the point about Manchester Airport connectivity, and clearly the point about the Leeds area study, and the fact that, albeit I recognise that Minister Merriman is trying to release the study, but it has been over a year for what is simply the terms of reference for the study, let alone the actual work to do the work. So we're all essentially just waiting, and the development, the growth, the investment that is on hold as a result of that is unacceptable. So that needs to be released, and it needs to be released as soon as humanly possible.
Yeah.
If I might respond to Mayor Coppard, I was going to suggest that maybe under the Rail North Committee we picked it up, because I know the Rail North Committee addressed it, but it might be opportune now to say my advice to the board would be, I think, Chair, you should be writing to the Secretary of State to emphasise that point. I think we should also maybe pick up on some of the related announcements. I think Midland Main Line, for example, I know is a particular concern for you, Mayor Coppard, about the uncertainty about it, and I would suggest, Chair, maybe that's something that the board would want us just to put on the Secretary of State's desk formally in a letter, setting out that these are important for not just for the South Yorkshire, but actually for the entire region.
Neil?
Thanks, yes. I referred to paragraph 4.5 on top of page 19 in terms of looking at additional corridors. I think that's been hinted at already by previous speaker. I just wondered how much progress has been made here identifying corridors outside those that were in the IRP, and whether there's any serious scope for, obviously in addition to those schemes that the TFN wants to see as part of its own plans. Just seek a bit more information on that.
David?
David?
Yes,
I can help a bit on that. I mean, there's quite a lot of work already that was done as part of the NPR full business case. So we have got a body of work. Some of it needs updating, and there's some new opportunities as well that might have presented themselves. So we've started some work on pulling that together, and we'll be presenting that to that officer forum in the next month.
Anybody else want to come in on this? I think as far as the points that was made by Mayor Coppard, I think everyone has been embarrassed by how long the lead study has taken to be published. I think even ministers are actually embarrassed by the amount of time it's taken. So let's hope that we see it by the 25th of July. And then we can start the debate as to how quick and the implementation, which will be very important.
Chair, if I just then, just to sort of round off the item, can I just check with the meeting, are you supportive of the response from the department? I mean, we put the board's collective concerns to the department. We've received the point that Nick has mentioned. I think there'll be a letter confirming that. So our advice as your officers is that does feel like it's addressed the points raised by the board, but I just want to just check that people are content. And I also just want to check, are people content that we write that letter as discussed about both the terms of reference and the Midland Main Line, just to raise that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Can we then move on to agenda item number 7, which... Sorry? Yeah, which is the road investment strategy, RIS. Owen, you're going to take us through your paper and start the discussion off, please.
Very briefly, I'll start the discussion off, and I'm very pleased that we've got representatives from the Department for Transport and National Highways here today. Who'll give a brief presentation while I'm introducing the second. This report is to discuss TfN's statutory response to the consultation on the Strategic Road Network Initial Report, which is a key planning document setting out the kind of terms of reference, if you like, for the next road investment strategy, which is 2025 to 2030. Members will recall we discussed RIS at the last board, and we were expecting these documents to be published shortly. They were published in May. So we have now a deadline of mid-July to respond to the SRN initial report. We've been working with your officers on drafting an initial response, and then it's mid-August for the other suite of documents that National Highways have published. I will stop there and can take questions at the end after the presentations. I'd like to introduce Adam Simmons, who's Director of Planning and Strategy at National Highways, and James Henry, who's head of the RIS3 team at the Department for Transport. I think James is briefly going to start.
Thank you, Owen. Good morning, everyone. My name is James, and I oversee the design of the third road investment strategy from 2025 to 2030 at the Department for Transport. So just before we get into the detail of what the SRN initial report says, I think it'd be helpful to recap on what the RIS contains. So the strategy has 4 components: a vision, a performance specification, an investment plan, and a statement of funds available, i.e. how much money is available for that road period. These different components will begin to take shape later this year when we publish the draft RIS. But the final decisions and the final decisions on the strategy won't be made until the final strategy is published, and we think that this will probably be late 2024. The RIS setting process requires careful choreography between the National Highways, the Department, and the Office of Rail and Road to ensure proposals, advice and decisions flow into a final RIS in a logical way. We've now reached the end of what we call the research phase. This finished when we published a consultation and National Highways published the initial report. The initial report is the company's assessment of the condition and current performance of the strategic road network and its proposals for RIS3. The consultation and the outcomes from the consultation will inform the development of the draft RIS, which will then help National Highways develop its detailed plans for the draft strategic business plan. And in terms of next steps, as Owen says, the consultation closes on the 13th of July. You can input into the process via the online consultation form, by email or by letter. And the department, as well as National Highways, can support you in this process through more tailored briefings, and we can attend discussions as well. And I'll now hand over to Adam.
Thank you, James. Good morning, everyone. Adam Simmons from National Highways. In the deck, in the pack that was sent around public deck, there is a presentation, I think, from page 47 in the on the PDF. I wasn't going to sort of turn through each page, but you may want to have that in front of you. There was one slide I will refer to as I go through. As James said, we're in consultation sort of period on the plan to RIS3. I actually just wanted to take this opportunity to say a genuine and sort of big thank you to Transport for the North for the engagement so far. There are two documents that really inform our initial report, but a whole series of route strategies where we seek to understand the performance of our main routes on the strategic road network, but critically, I think what our roads are serving. So really trying to understand the developments, be that sort of housing, commercial, where are those journeys sort of going from? It's been really helpful to have that engagement to understand those. What I would say for the route strategies, like Owen said, there is a consultation that National Highways is running in parallel to the government consultation on the RIS3 plans. If there's anything there you feel that we've missed, or there are sort of newer developments that we perhaps didn't pick up in that phase of developing the route strategies, we very much want these to be regularly updated. So sort of please feed through anything now, but genuinely open offer, and want to continue to work with Transport for the North to really make sure that we've got as up to date a picture as we can about what the strategic road network is serving. The other document that was published alongside the initial report was a document called Connecting the Country, that longer term vision. So very much wanted to make sure that our plans for the next 5 years were seated in the longer term direction of travel for transport. Again, thank you to TfN for the engagement there. One thing I would particularly draw out, and I think probably more for ongoing engagement with Martin and the team, we really started to think about, again, sort of how our network is used, recognising that perhaps there are some more local journeys, and what's the service we need to provide for those. There's journeys between regions, or at that regional level, what's the service we need to provide for that. And then again, recognising there are perhaps cross-country national journeys. So that might be an area I'd particularly value TfN's input going forward. And again, how we can make sure that the plans for the next 5 years are seated in that longer term view. If I can talk about what's in the Strategic Road Network initial report, if you did want to have a slide in front of you, if you look at page 54 in the deck, it's the one that's titled SRNIR Key Proposals, and I thought it'd be useful to go through those headings. First, on safety, very much as we've engaged with you and many other partners to understand that, it's perhaps no surprise that safety came through as a strong message of a priority for people using our network, which of course we agree with. Our licence requires us not only to maintain safety, but to improve it. And I think for me there's sort of two ways in which we do that overall. First, of course, we want to maintain the condition of our network and the assets. We want to continue to operate the network, obviously with safety in mind. Critically, though, to improve safety, we absolutely recognise there's a need to actually improve and enhance the network. There's a number of ways that we can do that, but we've put forward to government, I think, a strong sort of small sub-programme of safety schemes where we can particularly tackle the parts of the network which perhaps is not quite at the same level of safety as other parts of the network. So that's drawing on the international IRAP standard of looking at road safety, and we really want to be able to invest through those smaller enhancements of the network, focusing on the 1 and 2 star IRAP rated roads. So that's what we've put forward to government there on safety. The second area, again, no surprise, but definitely came back very strongly in our engagement with you and with with other partners was really about continuing to make the most of the network as it already exists, to continue to provide reliable and sort of high-speed sort of journeys for road users. Really, that's then about putting the right investment into the responsive maintenance, but also critically the big, what we call renewals activities, the big maintenance activities, recognising that actually a lot of the assets are aging. A lot of structures, particularly road surfacing, pavement, perhaps sort of from the 60s and 70s, just needs that sort of bigger intervention, and really critical for us that probably step up that level of investment from the previous road period to do that. And I think we've got the right balance there for what we need to do now as part of that longer term management of our assets going forward. Excuse me. The third area is around really providing services to road users, people that rely on, and businesses that rely on our network, and the communities alongside the network. Now, there are a few areas there where we want to invest. Things like our designated funds we know offer very high value to communities, to improving the environment, providing walking and cycling provision and so on. I think one area that I particularly wanted to draw your attention to where, again, I think we want to make a step up in investment here is around some of our digital assets, so using roadside technology, but I think critically as well data, to make sure we're packaging up data, one, accurately, but in an accessible way to providers that provide information to customers, particularly focusing actually on freight and logistics as an important customer there. So we want the data to be accurate, we want the data to be accessible. One thing I would flag is I think actually that's an area where we'd really welcome your input. I think there's a great opportunity through how we use data to really sort of achieve our collective ambitions around integration of transport between strategic road network, local roads, other modes, public transport. So I'd welcome your continued engagement there. The next category is around decarbonisation and achieving our environmental goals. I think there's a lot that we can do as a company in that space, particularly in decarbonising construction. Now, obviously, we want to do that in and of itself, but again, I think actually the sort of procurement that National Highways can do in this space, actually along with our partners in Network Rail, High Speed 2, actually then can help drive decarbonisation and efficiencies throughout the whole supply chain there, which hopefully again can pass on into other parts of the transport sector. Again, we want to do a lot to make sure we can use things like our roadside verges, our green estate, to manage that for biodiversity. Again, we want to be able to invest in there, and one of the recommendations we've made is actually about really thinking about our green spaces as an asset in the way that we would structures or drainage or lighting or what have you. I think in that environment space, we would recognise though, of course, the main source of emissions there, carbon emissions, of course, are from the tailpipe of the cars, trucks and vans using our roads. Very conscious that that's the Department for Transport, its Transport Decarbonisation Plan that's really driving that sort of change. But equally, we recognise that there are things we can do as a company to support that. So we've asked some questions about our role in terms of providing facilities, say for electric vehicle users, to help that transition for people to move over to electric, particularly where maybe longer distance journeys might be a source of concern, that range anxiety. And also from talking about facilities as well, sorry, perhaps we've mentioned previously, really thinking about how we can help the logistics and freight industry there, perhaps with parking facilities and lorry driver facilities for lorry drivers. The last area I'd want to just touch on about the themes in the initial report is around enhancements. I'll say a few things there. You'll be aware, and I think it was from the minutes it was discussed at the last TfN board meeting, on the 9th of March, government put forward a written ministerial statement saying of the major enhancements that it asked National Highways to consider as part of taking forward as RIS3, the so-called pipeline of major enhancements. They still want us to consider, but much more for consideration in RIS4 rather than RIS3. What I would say, though, is that we're very much carrying on with schemes that are already in the programme, in the plan. So what's in our delivery plan we're very much continuing with. That includes Lower Thames Crossing there's A27 Arundel and Port of Liverpool, which were put forward in that written ministerial statement as deferrals, so still absolutely working on those. But again, I'd emphasise two other areas of enhancements that came through very strongly in our engagement that again we're sort of putting forward to ministers for government's consideration. The first I actually already mentioned, enhancing our network for safety. So really making sure we've got a programme of the sort of smaller enhancements that really make a difference to safety. The second area are some of the smaller enhancements, typically junction improvements, which we really heard strong feedback from particularly local partners where perhaps that's some of the areas of particular frustration, where there might be congestion bottlenecks on our network, where if we can put comparatively small investment into those sorts of schemes, actually across a number of smaller investments across the whole country, we can make quite a big difference to congestion and particularly ease local journeys, make sort of those sort of last mile journeys from the strategic road network into local roads, particularly for freight and sort of logistics, really make a difference. Just to close out, and thank you for obviously in the papers sharing the draft response you proposed to take forward. I would really welcome everything that is in that note. Really helpful to get that very specific feedback into the consultation. I did want to pick up 2 points. I think you quite rightly raised the point around being really clear on traffic forecasts and making sure they're credible traffic forecasts, feeding into obviously government's ambitions for decarbonisation and what the Committee for Climate Change sets out. That is actually an area we're continuing to work with the Department for Transport and really want to make sure that those traffic forecasts are credible. I think we're at a point where we can make sure that business cases are based on credible traffic forecasts that do align with those carbon ambitions, but would very much welcome your continued engagement on that and recognise the point raised in your proposed sort of draft response. The other point you made, which I wanted to pick up, was making sure that there's consideration of alternatives in our planning, so public transport, other modes, walking and cycling, and so on. Very much welcome that point and comment. I think what I would say is in scheme development there is that stage, but critically for me I think it's about looking at about the investment in the round, the whole programme, the whole investment there. What hopefully has come across in our proposals, our recommendations for RIS3 is absolutely that balance of investment across the piece and sort of recognising that it is important we give people as much choice as possible in how they travel. Yes, absolutely see a case for continued car, truck, sort of van use, but increasingly, particularly for local journeys, we want to make sure we're playing our part in making cycling and walking provision and so on. I think I'll leave it there. Be very grateful for any questions and feedback, but thank you for the opportunity to come here today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Adam. There's a number of people I think want to come in, so I will sort of go around the table and get those in. I would just like to start by just asking, I think you partly did cover it at the end, but I just want to be absolutely sure. Is it still a requirement by the Department of Transport that all your schemes are all new schemes are cycle proof in building into availability for cyclists to be able to travel safely? I think there's going to be a number of questions, but that's I can't remember who that mad idea, but it is something that I would like to know is still part of the department's overall thinking. Right, I think, sorry, I can't see all names. I think Neil first, and then if we go around that way, that would be fine, and then Oliver next. Okay.
Okay. Grateful to be able to begin here. I commend the draft TFN response here, particularly with its highlighting of the need to reinforce modal shift, the need for national highways to attempt to do that perhaps more strenuously. And I think this point was acknowledged, particularly in terms of Westmoreland and Furness, which I represent here today. I welcome the fact that the intention is to integrate the strategic road strategy with more local major road strategies, and hopefully with the fullest possible consultation. But I know our officers and members are particularly concerned in the case of the A66 dueling, which we welcome on safety grounds, but where local drivers clearly know the roads, and despite very full promotion of recognised diversion routes along major roads, will take rat runs and no doubt cause a good deal of damage inevitably to smaller roads. And we saw this happen during Storm Desmond when a number of major roads were closed, and it was particularly the case where HGVs were using roads completely unsuitable for them. Now, there's going to be some enforcement of HGVs, we're told, this time, but I've been particularly asked to flag up this point in terms of the A66, but no doubt others around the table will have schemes in their own areas that they have similar concerns relating to.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Owen, did you wanted to come back in, or do you want to come back in? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Councillor Tim Mitchell. Sorry, a few months ago we were briefed by Siemens about a proposal to electrify a stretch of the M180. Is this something that National Highways know about, or is it a proposal that's pretty much dead in the water?
We'll come back in a... Oliver.
Thank you. I mean, broadly speaking, endorse the response to the from TFN. I think two concerns from South Yorkshire's perspective, one of which is the deferral of the A1 upgrade from RIS 3 to RIS 4, which is a much needed road widening scheme for Doncaster, and secondly, some concerns around the Transpennine routes, including the A628 Woodhead Pass as well. So, would be interested in that being advanced. And then it was a question really for colleagues about the Northern Transport Acceleration Unit, which, as I understand it, is being closed. Read into that what you will, and clearly that's aimed at speeding up major transport projects in the north. So the question is really, how is that going to impact, and are colleagues aware of that, have concerns as we do in South Yorkshire about that move? Thank you.
Okay, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Adam. My concern is with the reference in the TFN draft report to this process of RIS 3 now being kind of knocking projects into RIS 2, knocking projects into RIS 3, which are then knocking projects into RIS 4. And the document says TFN will need to consider its feedback on that to the government. I mean, just to sort of spell out what this means, and I think it's another one of those issues, sadly, because of our geography here in Greater Manchester, that it probably affects pretty much everyone around the table, given that this isn't our traffic. It's obviously traffic that's coming from one part of the north and going to maybe a different one, but it comes through here. As I understand it, this means two key projects in Greater Manchester could be deferred till after 2030. One of which is the stuff that comes out of the M60 Junction 8 to Junction 18 Northwest Quadrant study. I'm told, well, I'd say I'm told, I mean, I drive through it, as I'm sure other people do, that this is the sort of the road network, the northern road network equivalent of the Castlefield corridor, because this is the bit where you're driving and then you're almost certain to start stopping, and as you come through Greater Manchester. And I think it would be a real concern for us if that is being kind of pushed into the next decade. So I just want to put that on the table, and if this process is to happen, I think maybe this is for TFN, Chair, more than National Highways, I don't know, but should there be a process that guides the should there be a reprioritisation of schemes, rather than just knocking them on, well, that one wasn't done this time, so it's now, I think there has to be a recognition of the kind of impact of these schemes on traffic flow. As I say, this isn't just special pleading from here. This area really does affect people who are, you know, doing business across the north and coming through, and you know, and it is, as people know, a very sticky area as it stands. So, and it has implications for a number of strategic development sites for us, noticeably Port Salford. So, I would like some clarification about what is planned from the government side, but then also if you could say something, Chair, or Martin could say something about what's an emerging TFN view on that. The thing at the moment just says we'll have to consider our feedback. I think we need to have our eyes open to what this could actually mean. Thank you.
I think that is part of what the whole RIS, I mean, bearing in mind this is only RIS 3, it shows how new a RIS programme is. Yes, it started off in RIS 1 and 2 and been incredibly ambitious, and some of those ambitions not being matched, and particularly big schemes across the country, which took either a lot of it, and as inflation has taken a hold, then there was not the money to do some of the issues that were wider anticipated earlier on. But what is important is we identify which are the most important as far as Transport for the North are concerned, and how those are moved forward, because we've got to feed into that category, and we've got to make sure that is understood when the department considers what the RIS programme is going to be. I was slightly surprised at your timing, saying it was going to be late 24, because that fills me with horror as to actually seeing anything in the next 12 months. Who else wants to come in on? Oh, right, sorry, Helen first, and then Hans, and yeah, right, okay. Oh, right. We'll work the way down there. We'll start off with Helen.
Thanks, Chair. Helen Simpson, I'm Chair of the York and North Yorkshire Rep. You would expect me to look you in the eye and mention the A64. So we now both know that we have done that. But I think it links to Andy's wider point about the prioritisation, and just shunting stuff back is not good, and not also creating the competitive this road versus that road. I think looking at the big picture and how things connect. So the A64 has implications for York and the role that has as it steps up in our new mayoral authority, but it also has immense implications for the coast, and the worst deprivation stats in the area are in Scarborough, which it just is left where it is until we can sort out the A64. So I think there's the individual bits, but actually it's the whole north, and a cohesive plan for all of us. And in that spirit of teaminess across the north, we also would be very supportive of the comments made by colleagues earlier about the A66 and the implications that that has across further north as well. So we need to understand the shunting, we need to understand the priority, and obviously the A64 is very important. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, I think on a similar vein, I think it's to do with the cost of everything going up, and then are we going to get a lot less in the future? Particularly looking at previously agreed schemes. I was looking, Nick's gone now, but we had a particular scheme was interested for Warrington, what Nick was involved in, which now get put back and left there because the need is still there, the case is still there, but the funding isn't as it was. So what I'm looking at is the cost, the actual growing cost of planned schemes can hold back investments and development, and then they hold back the old growth of the north, and how we actually become economically on an equal footing with the rest of the country. And we seem to be always at the back of every queue when it comes to that. So anything where we don't get what we need on the rail, puts more traffic on the roads, and then we're getting a poorer deal on our roads. So we're sort of at the back of everything. And what I want to look at is what's our road investment per head of population compared to the rest of the country. And there's a suspicion that we get a worse deal than everywhere else, but can we actually find the details of that to say, are we getting a worse deal than anyone else? Is more investments in other parts of the country, and are we being held back by the factors that the cost of living crisis, cost of everything that's going up there, and the north are the ones who sort of miss out on everything and become, saying a year back in time becomes 2 years, schemes that could have been developed don't happen, but we're always seen to be in a situation where we're worse off. But I'd like to be in a situation where we can actually prove that.
Okay, thanks, Hans. Rupert? Mark, sorry, Mark. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Broadly support the draft response. Couple of things. I'd like to reinforce the support for a focus on the smaller schemes. I'm always a great believer that those smaller schemes have a disproportionately beneficial impact at a local level, particularly from an economic point of view as well, and opening up economic opportunities there. So I'd like that reinforced. And then I'm going to stick my head above the parapet a bit here, because if we continue to look through the prism of net zero and decarbonisation, whatever, it perhaps gives an opportunity to build an anti-roads narrative. And I would hate that to happen, and I'm making a plea here for a lot of the rural areas that make up the north of England, where there simply is no alternative to road transport at the current time. And therefore I'd like to see that come out in the draft response to us, that the rural areas are very dependent upon road transport, and therefore I wouldn't want to see that in any way downgraded at the expense of other things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. But I mean, while I appreciate the point you're making, this is what Highways England does, as opposed to what the County Council or the Highway Authority will do. So that's what we're doing. The point is a valid point, but
it goes to the point of integration of all of these things, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, sorry, I'm Sam Corcoran, leader of Cheshire East Council. I want to speak in favour of paragraph 3 on page 39. It's quite strong language. It says, we have fundamental concerns with the mismatch between the national road traffic projections, which are substantially higher under most scenarios than that assumed with the CCC's balanced pathway. A programme based on the NRTP would be inconsistent with the requirements of CCC's 6th carbon budget. And I take Adam's point that we want to have credible traffic forecasts, but as a politician, I'm not here to predict the future, I'm here to change the future. And later on our agenda, it's page 119, agenda item 9, paragraph 4.4 says we're going to help partners to robustly evidence the benefits of reduced vehicle mileage and how to achieve this. That's what I would like to aim to do. It's a very ambitious target, but that's what we should be doing to try and tackle climate change. And to end on a positive point, I fully support Adam's comment about the bottlenecks. If we can address those bottlenecks, that can reduce carbon emissions, but I'd like to see the evidence to say that the works that we're going to do will actually reduce the carbon emissions rather than simply increasing the amount of traffic on increased roads. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowland.
Yeah, Denise Rowland, I'm representing Cumberland Council. I think I'll probably echo what was mentioned there about Cheshire. It is the crucial part of the road networks play in the rural areas. I think there needs to be a stronger emphasis within this. In particular, we believe that the response should be more explicit with the need to improve the journey times and the reliability of the network. We don't have any much resilience in Cumbria. You know, if the road's shut, you're not going anywhere. So obviously this needs to be looked at. So I think very much like you said, and the future ready. I think we had a conversation yesterday with future ready. Well, the autonomous vehicles and 5G, I can't ever see that happening in Cumbria for a very, very long time.
Okay, thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome the response. It's balanced and sensible, and I also support Mark's point about incremental improvement from a business point of view. It's these dealing with pinch points and smaller interventions can be very valuable. I just want to raise a point about devolution, really, and also the point about transport for the north and not transport in the north. We want to be in control of our own destiny in the north, increased focus on devolution. And yet we have key roads which we have no control over. So Sheffield to Manchester are the worst connected city pair in Europe. 20 miles an hour average speed of journey, 70 days, no resilience on the road whatsoever. And it's a road that is not controlled by national highways. This is the A57 Snake Pass or the A623, which goes over Tideswell Moor. It's controlled by Derbyshire County Council. So how can we make sure that these sort of roads get the attention they deserve from a transport for the North strategic point of view when we can't engage directly with national highways about them because they're not under their control? Thanks.
Right, okay, Owen, sum that up.
categorising schemes. I'm not going to start naming schemes today, but a number of the ones that have been mentioned are, we did see as important that they're taken forward quickly. Now, National Highways, I don't think they have an understanding of what the budget will be for RIS3, so it's a really difficult area for them as well as ourselves in terms of setting priorities. But I think we need to be going back to government and saying we need investment in our highway network. It is a critical asset for the North. 97% of all journeys take place on the highway as a whole, and the SRN takes huge volumes of freight and passenger journeys, so we need to be making those points. I'm not going to go through everything that was mentioned, but I think to pick up on a few things from colleagues in the rural areas, I recognise that fully, and I think we just need to review what we've written. The roads are critical for all parts of the North, but particularly for rural areas which are more reliant on road transport. We are strongly supporting the A66 dualling, and will continue to do so. It's now completed its DCO public inquiry. We were waiting on the decision for that, and working with the local authorities on supporting that. In terms of coming back to Manchester North West Quadrant, we've been pressing for more information from National Highways and the department on where that's at. I understand that National Highways have been asked to look at a series of interventions, potentially packaged over 2 or 3 RIS periods, but we've not had sight of that yet, and I think that's something we continue to press for. Anything else critical I've missed? In terms of the traffic forecasts, again, I think that's where TfN can work with the department and with National Highways to look at future scenarios and what is required to meet our ambitions around decarbonisation. And it's not going to be easy, is it? And it needs input from all partners. It's not just National Highways, and this comes back to the collaboration point. Where we're looking at the SRN around urban areas, we need to be looking at the evidence in terms of supporting bus and Metrolink or walking and cycling. Again, TfN can play a key role along with local partners in doing that. And maybe it's timely, but the local transport plan guidance is due out soon, and all local partners will be developing their LTPs. And again, we stand ready to support that work. I think I'll stop there, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And Andy just wants to come back in.
Sorry, Chair, and sorry to prolong this discussion, everyone. Thanks for what you just said there. I was just very struck by the point Hans made and the point Helen made. I wonder, Chair, whether we could have, when we get more information from the department, a kind of look at what RIS3 means in terms of the proposals that are being made when we look at the schemes, if you like, shown across the north, and whether we as a board think they're the best use of that funding. But then separately, we should see how much that adds up to for the north compared to what is being spent in other parts of the country. And I think we do need to take a look at that as a board. We should argue for more if we're not getting what we believe is, people have to, I think the point a number of colleagues have made, Denise made it, people here rely more on roads, and therefore it can't be the case that we get treated second class again when it comes to investment in infrastructure, given that, we get poor deal on rail infrastructure, therefore it can't follow we get a poor deal on roads as well. So we need to challenge that, I think. But then even within that, is the envelope that we're being given prioritising the right things for us when we see it with the connectivity and would we as a board want to say, well, we would between ourselves agree something different even with that pot of money. So I just wonder, I hope that's intended to be helpful, but I think if we could visualise how much there is and where it's actually going, I think that probably this board would have a good discussion about that. And I would like to think TFN, if given those type of challenges, can stick to a budget, but then potentially come up with something that's more sensible from our knowledge of the north of England. And I just think that's, before this process ends, that's a plea for me, really, for us to have as a board that type of presentation.
I think, Andy, I think that's absolutely right. And part of being able to make that judgment is to ensure that we've got the data that's available. And I think is publicly available as far as where pinch points are and delay points are. Because that is incredibly important, and it's getting that balance across the whole of the north as to what the budget is and where the priorities would be. Martin wanted to come in, then I'll ask Adam, and then I think we'll... Well, go on then very briefly.
Well, re-emphasising, I think, that differing views were expressed by rural contributors here. Yes, it's absolutely true, the rural areas do rely on the car. There is no meaningful alternative in many, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't continue strongly in the attempt for modal shift, because if the decarbonisation strategy is going to be taken seriously, and remember the government has its own as well, then TFN, in my view, certainly should be fully engaged in that process.
Absolutely, no problem. I completely endorse that. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on a number of broader strategic points, building on not just what Mayor Burnham said, but other members. Just a reminder to you as a board, we've shared with you, or we've started using the Northern Powerhouse Independent Economic Review update as part of the foundations of the Strategic Transport Plan. Responding to Councillor Mundry's point, that does show that as an investment per head, the North still gets a bad deal, and we've seen that in the difference between the GDP in the North and the rest of the country. So you've got a tool there that we can use with you as a board, and certainly we want to bring that to you as a board in September. Leading on that, just to make the board aware, myself and Katie have been having a number of conversations recently with officials at DLUC, and I'm particularly struck, particularly by the Northwest Quadrant, Mayor Burnham, that's not just about transport, it's actually about unlocking growth. It's actually planned growth. And so I think we've got an opportunity there to use the connections with DLUC to actually make the articulation. This is an investment to deliver economic outcomes. I heard at the Rail North Committee a similar point about the members' willingness to be prioritising within an envelope, and we've got that very much as part of the work we want to do on the implementation of the Strategic Transport Plan. So please, members, please take that with the Northern Transport Acceleration Unit. I think my advice to you as a board, we've also seen the DFT's acceleration unit be formally wound up more recently. I think this is where you as a board, when you're looking at the implementation of the Strategic Transport Plan, which is again a conversation we want to have with you in September, I think there's an opportunity for you as a board to use the functions that we've got as a board to make advice about improving the efficiency and the effectiveness of delivery. I think that's something we want to bring to you as a board, and we want your input, because there's an opportunity alongside the Strategic Transport Plan to say, here's what you're saying needs to be changed to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness. So I think I just didn't want to lose that point, Mayor Coppard. And the point, Peter, that you made about Snake Pass, we'll take it away that we'll talk to our colleagues in Midlands Connect to make sure that we're making that connection, because you're right, it's an impact for us, but it's in another part, and we mustn't let that boundary act as a boundary to our own conversation. So the point's taken, and we'll take that forward.
Adam.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I can go through some of those, and apologies if I miss anything. Starting chair, you asked about your cycling. Certainly when schemes are developed, cycling absolutely, and walking absolutely part of that. Sorry, excuse me. If Transport Focus were here as well, kind of equestrian as well, I know there's all things like that that also ought to be considered. What I would say is, compared to perhaps there is two, Anti-Travel England, of course, now exists, a partner we very much want to work with, and indeed partners like Sustrans. So I think certainly look at that as part of scheme development, but again have investment through designated funds, but perhaps we can also deal with parts of the network perhaps that hasn't been looked at, where schemes were designed much earlier. A lot of discussion about modal shift. Very supportive of that. We've done a lot of work with Network Rail, things like kind of multimodal freight studies, trying to support that, supporting business cases from Network Rail to improve freight facilities there. I would say as well, I think bus and coach was mentioned. I do think that plays into things like the junction improvement sort of schemes. I know that can be a big benefit there. A66 dualling was mentioned. I think Martin talked about, or Owen talked about, supporting that and wanting to continue with our plans there. The question about electrifying the M120, I'm not aware of us doing that. I can't categorically say it's not happening. We'll check with our Mike Wilson, our chief engineer, on that. I know we are looking very carefully at a lot of those catenary type system trials that are happening in Germany, Sweden, places like that. I think what that comes to is actually wanting to work very closely with you, the Department for Transport, particularly about how we support decarbonisation of trucks and sort of heavy goods. So do let me follow that specifically up though. Obviously a lot was talked about those pipeline schemes, A1 Doncaster, Manchester North West Quadrant. I think what I would say is, we do want to make sure that we kind of continue the development work that we've been doing so far, and obviously report back to the Department and Ministers on that. Absolutely take your point then about wanting to understand that, so that's something we ought to coordinate with the Department. I know in the written statement it was that work should continue, so I think very keen that it's not simply shelved and then we have to go back to square one on those, so but completely understand why you'd want to put forward in your response that you'd want those still to be considered in RIS 3. A64 Hotgrove was mentioned. I know there's a piece of work sort of going on at the moment, sort of report, I think, around sort of autumn, trying to obviously to improve the value for money of that. So we will make sure that we follow up on that. The point was raised actually about costs going up and inflation. That's certainly a point that we've made and we're sort of discussing and wanting to sort of follow with government and the Department for Transport on that. Obviously, it is a factor. It is something that will affect affordability. So, very conscious of that, and of course, rates. Only today, ONS I think put out some updated figures there. I think you did talk about the investment per capita for the north. That's probably as much a question for investment going forward. I know we sort of looked at historic sort of investment, but I think this is more your investment going forward. So obviously you'll want to see as plans emerge how that looks. In terms of some of the rural areas points, I think there's a couple of things I wanted to raise there. Certainly when we were doing a lot of engagement sessions as we went around the country, one of the points was made particularly around perhaps sort of smaller communities accessing the strategic road network and the safety concerns there, but perhaps because it was smaller numbers of movements in the past, that not getting the focus. What I would say is by focusing on these 1 and 2 star IRAP roads, that is about the conditions of the road, not about sort of volumes of traffic. So I think there is an opportunity there. Specifically safety, I know that's not the only sort of point around access to between the SRN and rural communities, but I think that might help us. Traffic projections, of course, were mentioned. We sort of touched on that. I think for me, I guess quite rightly sort of raised the challenge of whether traffic can be reduced and still deliver the benefits. I think critically there for me, it's about making sure we're not getting to a point where we're constraining choice by sort of doing so. So I think it's making sure obviously there are transport choices for for users, and that we're not simply constraining transport overall would be my view on that one. But it's very much a live topic to be discussed, not just for roads but for transport more widely. I think the other point I would raise, that came up on rural areas was specifically about the reliability of the network. What I would say, it probably doesn't get much attention, but let me flag. One of the reasons why we want to get the investment in the renewals of our asset is to avoid getting to the point where emergency works or emergency restrictions need to be put in place. We want to avoid the sort of experience of Clifton outside Nottingham, which I think when we had to close that road made Nottingham the most congested city in the world, I think it was, for a few days, sort of based on data. That's why we want to get the investment of our renewals of our assets right, so we can intervene just before sort of failure. We get it done in a managed, controlled way, cheaper way. We're avoiding those emergency closures. So I think that's as much critical about reliability as about enhancing the network. I think I've covered everything there, and I know James, who wants to come in on a couple of points.
Thank you, Adam. I welcome some of the comments that members have made around prioritisation. I think the fiscal context, the way it is at the moment with the inflation context, means that we are sort of asking all subnational transport bodies to carefully think through what they would prioritise depending on the funding. We continue to negotiate with the Treasury on the RIS3 budget. Those conversations are ongoing. And I wanted to pick up on the Chair's point around 2024. Late 2024 is the final strategy. Late 2023 is the draft strategy that will be published alongside our response to the ongoing consultation. So members should see something later this year ahead of the 2024 deadline that I talked about earlier. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you, colleagues. I think that's been a very interesting discussion, because I think we've basically covered almost everything, from the sort of A66 to also how you do a proper service to remote rural areas as well. And I hadn't quite realised that Highways England took equine access as on par with walking and cycling, but that's.
North Yorkshire would be very expensive to know that.
But I think it has been a very worthwhile discussion. It's a lot for our officers as well to take back into getting that balance right as to how we respond to the RIS programme, but also how we respond to future road network programmes as well. And also, of course, the whole issue which has to underline a lot of this is decarbonisation and reliability as well. So thank you all for that discussion. Now, I've been told that what we should do now is go back to the early part of the agenda, because we're now at sort of quorum numbers. Well, so can I hand over to Martin?
One step first, Chair. So, colleagues, we started the meeting as a consultation call because we weren't quorum. We're in a position now where if a member of the board were to move, you could agree to suspend the rules on the quorum, which is about number of authorities and weighted votes, and you could then proceed as a constituted meeting. Julie, have I got that correct?
I think so broadly, thank you. Yeah, there's a provision in the rule. We've got enough members present now. The weighted votes are very slightly short, but there's the provision whereby the weighted vote element can be suspended on a motion without notice. So basically what we need is a member to move that, someone to second it, everyone to agree, and then we can continue with business as a quorum meeting, including those deferred items. Thanks.
Thanks, Jude. I've got Councillor Mundry, I think, wishing to move it, and Councillor Swarbrick is happy to second it. So is the meeting minded to move that?
Yes.
In which case we can go back to the second item on the agenda, which was the appointment of chair and vice chairs. And can I ask if there is a nomination for the role of chair? Councillor, Mayor Vernon, I'm sorry.
Could I nominate Lord Patrick McLaughlin?
And Councillor Mundry?
I'll second that.
Is the meeting content with Lord McLaughlin as the...
Thank you.
Chair? So now it's the majority vice chair.
Right, okay. Can I have nominations then, please, for the majority vice chair?
Can we go with Louise Grittings, please?
Councillor Gittings is being moved, seconded.
Mayor
Coppard. All in agreement?
Yeah.
Thank you. Fine.
And minority.
And minority vice chair?
I'd like to move it, Rupert, please.
Rupert Swerbeck, can I have a seconder, please, for Rupert? Thank you. Okay, all in agreement? Excellent. We can move on now to jump. I won't do my opening remarks that I got prepared from the beginning, but we'll now jump to item number 8, which is the connected mobility strategy, and Matt, you're going to talk us. We've got the paper that's been circulated and also the draft version of his report. Matt, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to run through a quick presentation to sum up some of the detail of the strategy and some of the sort of outcomes set in the report. So first and foremost, what is connected mobility? It's a term that we sort of came up collectively with last year to sort of expand upon digital aspirations, to really highlight the connection of people to place across geographical boundaries, technical silos and modal barriers. And this really is integrated ticketing, better journey planning and better integration across different sort of actors in this space. So what does that mean in terms of Transport for the North's role in this space? Well, the board last year set out sort of clear objectives around how we would add value on a regional basis. So first and foremost, we are here to build on existing successes in the north of England. A lot of our authorities are doing really strong work in this space, have done strong work in this space and intend to continue doing strong work. We're there to make sure that's as easy as possible and as many scalable benefits from those existing successes can be derived. Secondly, it's about developing an evidence base and tools to support the future development of some of these connected mobility work streams, and again, importantly, to unlock additional funding. I think members will be aware that there's been a diverse range of different funding pots and bids over the past few years to sort of unlock better, smarter ticketing, various improvements on bus service fares and things like that. And this piece of sort of objective is to bring some of those areas of commonality together and secure sort of more joined up funding aspirations for that. And then finally looking at developing sort of common frameworks and standards that would move some of those technical silos or interoperability challenges across different modes and regions if people are passing between county areas. So in terms of the strategy, aligned with the Strategic Transport Plan, which is in consultation, the implementation of this is designed to be place-based. So the north of England is made up of a diverse range of geographies, towns, cities, rural areas, and when it comes to sort of ticketing systems or data infrastructure or technical systems, a one-size-fits-all approach really won't work for that. Passengers expect different things, authorities expect different things, and this strategy is really about sort of highlighting the importance of that local decision-making around fare structures, ticketing systems, and the passenger experience. So within the strategy, taking our policy in places framework as a baseline, we've identified sort of some of the common areas of likely focus based on those archetypes. So for example, we've got the likes of Greater Manchester, South Yorkshire, where a fully integrated system is the appropriate solution. We've got commuter towns where hub and spoke models that feed into some of those larger integrated systems is a solution. And then rural communities or transformational visitor communities where external journeys into are integrated with leisure sectors, etc. And again, it's important that as we consider some of these often highly technological developments, that we are user-centric in the approach, that whilst it's recognised, I think 94% of people have access to the internet, what we can't have is overarching digital solutions that push those 6% who might be reliant on public transport out of accessing opportunities. And this links in with the strong work that we've been doing on transport-related social exclusion, in that as we start developing, say, cashless solutions and digital solutions, we need to be really cognizant of the fact that we don't want to build upon a digital divide or push unbanked or cashless passengers out of the transport network and infrastructure, particularly given those are the most vulnerable transport users who need to have access to it. And then the strategy and the implementation of it needs to be with industry and with partners. It's underlined by a collaborative spirit in that from day one, all of those actors involved in delivering these things, be they local transport authorities, transport operators, technical suppliers, data standards organisations, really need to be involved and engaged with as an early opportunity and are key participants and developers in the implementation of some of these pieces of work. We need to take the lessons learned from the Integrating Smart Travel programme, where there were challenges around that engagement piece, and the buying, particularly from the commercial side of things, where we really develop the tools that understand that commercial modelling and the resilience and viability of some of these propositions. So the strategy itself is split into 3 core thematic areas, which are sort of underpinned across deriving passenger benefits. The first of these, and I'm not going to read all of these outcomes in detail today, is around the future of ticketing. So this is exploring concepts around multi-operator ticketing. The North of England has established some sort of mature schemes in this space, but areas that don't. How do we bridge that gap between the existing successes and developing it in other areas? How do we bring that pan-regional perspective to that? What's the sort of future approach for smart card schemes, both new and legacy, particularly with reference to the English National Concessionary Travel Pass, which is currently required to be delivered by smart card and has quite costly infrastructure behind it that might become less viable if we're moving on to sort of non-smart card based solutions. There's obviously pay-as-you-go. I think it's a clear aspiration for a lot of authorities to have that brought to bear. There are 2 national programmes in which that's a key objective. We need to play a key role in bridging the gap between that national aspiration and the impact locally, be that fare structures or abstraction risks. And then, broadly speaking, that fares and retail reform, both in rail and out of rail. How do we support authorities in making educated and robust decisions around the financial models they need to put in place for simplified fare structures and viable fare structures? And then barcodes and new tokens is, as various different systems come into play from a ticketing point of view, how do authorities collectively have confidence in which is the most appropriate one to either invest public funds in or to engage through their partnerships with operators and delivery partners? So those are just some of the regional outcomes. Now there's a mix in these outcomes across all thematic areas. Some will be ones that we directly deliver as TfN. Some are those which collectively across the north of England through stated ambitions are joined up outcomes that everybody sort of would like to see and how we can support other partners in realising those. And then broadly just what we think the north of England expects for passengers in this space. The second thematic area, and I really welcome the comment earlier from Highways England around data integrations, is how do we start to use data to improve passenger journeys and improve authority confidence in networks integrations. So we're looking at building upon the background of open data and open source data. It's worked very successfully in London. We have started seeing improvements of that with the Bus Open Data Service. How do we maximise the impact of that and make that interoperable across different modes and open that up to authorities to access that in a way that sort of adds value to their holistic network planning? Journey planning and disruptions. Obviously, this is one of the front-end things where people engage with the transport network, confidence in those systems and having all of the options and opportunities to make journeys presented to them in a uniform way that sort of reflects local needs is really important to that because that's where the confidence derives from. And then we're looking at standardising interoperable data. Those people who have been working with smart cards historically in the past will know that there's a lot of quite complex back office data. Generally speaking, technical systems in transport have been developed in silos. How do we start taking different implementations across the north of England and sort of drawing out common specifications from a technical point of view to reduce those barriers or the need for authorities to invest funds to work with neighbouring authorities to integrate different systems. And then we need to sort of look at the infrastructure and procurement piece. We've touched upon 4G and 5G in an earlier conversation, but a lot of these systems, particularly in rural areas, are dependent on having the infrastructure in place. How do we sort of take from a northern point of view an understanding of the gap in infrastructure and what that means in terms of going back to government and saying some of these aspirations around multi-operator, multimodal systems are great, but the infrastructure isn't there yet. How do we get funding to sort of improve that, enhance that? And then how do we make it easier for authorities to procure some of these systems that can quite often be complex technical specifications that might be outwith of local capacity and capability to deliver? Again, that's taking examples where authorities have done it before successfully. Can we get shared learning from that, some common specifications? And then finally, working with the supplier and innovation space that a lot of times in the past in transport, we've been on the back foot when it comes to industry innovation. We really need to be at the same table with those innovators to make sure that our interests and the interests of the passengers of the north of England are reflected, and we're not steamrolled by technical innovation at the cost of our control or ability to influence that. And then the final thematic area is future mobility. So this is sort of looking at what's on the horizon in terms of new modes of travel and how they can be integrated into a network appropriately, viably, and sustainably. We've touched upon rural mobility already in some earlier conversations, but this is looking at things like demand-responsive transport or flexible modes of travel in rural areas. How do they fit into a sort of joined-up network? Are they appropriate in certain circumstances? And if so, what's the commercial model and how they integrate with other modes of transport? How do you start looking at micromobility? It's a contentious area. I think we've seen some headlines recently around sort of the regulatory piece around that. How do authorities and how do we support authorities having confidence in the future direction for emerging micromobility modes and how they make them work in a, say, fare structure that might have buses, it might have trains, it might have trams in? Again, EV and car club integration, I think one of the key things under this strategy is how do you make the car an appropriate mode of transport within a broader transport network? So touching upon that some journeys will need to be made by car, we'll use the major road network. How do you interface those with a
local transport system, be that park and ride, ticketing integration, payment integrations, to sort of avoid people going into urban hubs in single occupancy vehicles, but instead arriving to a periphery and going into them on mass transit. And then how do we start integrating more holistically active travel and rewarding active travel within transport? If you're planning a journey, can we unlock data and work with different technical suppliers to start saying, well, actually, you can make a walking break between these services to get in your steps. You've got a history of being happy to do that. It helps manage demand on those networks, but also allows us to sort of encourage and reward active travel. Potentially, technology allows you to start exploring the possibility of rewarding that through actual mobility credits. You've walked 10,000 steps, here's, I don't know, 50p off your next single journey or something along those lines. And again, how do we connect through different mobility hubs? I mean, we've got key interchange points in the north of England, both within for intra-regional travel, but outside of the north into the north travel. How do we make sure that passengers or users coming into our region are able to make a seamless onward journey without having to sort of research quite complex products, research quite complex systems? And a lot of that will link to the data infrastructure piece. And then more broadly speaking, when it looks at the innovation sort of horizon, how can we as a pan-northern authority provide thought leadership and confidence to our members that something that's on the horizon is either appropriate for them in their sort of geography, taking that place-based approach, it's appropriate for our northern passengers using the user-centric sort of mindset, or alternatively it might not be, that the regulation hasn't yet caught up, so can we go back to government or regulatory bodies to say, well, this has a role to play, we can't deploy it just yet. So those, broadly speaking, are the thematic areas, and each of them has a set of outcomes. Now, the outcomes, there are risks associated whether or not we can meet some of them in the timeframes and the strategy, but I think they are deliberately ambitious because the north of England has been very ambitious in this space before, and we need to continue being ambitious in this space and really drive the message that we have already succeeded, but not to the extent we could have done if we were more joined up and had greater funding delivered across, say, 3 or 4 authorities with common aspirations. The report is recommending that the board collectively approve, subject to any sort of amendments or comments you might have, the publication of this strategy and then the translation it into a sort of immediate, this financial year work programme and then subsequent years. This financial year, the priorities would be around sort of mirroring the multi-operator schemes we have in some of our city regions into our non-city regions and deriving economies of scale from those. Producing a fares modelling tool to allow authorities that might not have the capacity to sort of do complex economic analysis of fare structures to do so. Start bringing together a business case for a joined up fund for some of these technical innovations where there is common areas of procurement. And then also to revisit some of the pre-pandemic assumptions around travel behaviour, peak patterns and likely demand, and how that aligns with fare structures and network planning. So if I could open up to the room and members for any sort of comments, observations around the strategy.
Thank you, Matt. Rupert?
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this report, and I'd be happy to move the recommendation. It's very welcome, representing an area where we have to knit a lot of different types of transport under some nodding from other rural colleagues. This is a particularly, or colleagues with rural areas, this is a particularly welcome piece of work. And I look forward to getting out of the strategy bit into the activity bit.
Thanks, Jed. I would echo what Councillor Swarbrick just said. I think it's a very good piece of work. I think just one kind of note of caution. We did go down the path of integrated ticketing as a board before, and I think we have to remember why that stalled. It is linked to reform of public transport. I think when you don't control the fare box for the different modes, it's very hard to have ambitions for integration, and you can quickly get into a sort of the ambition can't be realised. So I do think you need to link it more to the reform of public transport, particularly in city regions like ours, and I know Oliver's got ambitions in a similar way to Steve and Tracy. That's the building block, I think, for a lot of this change. And in that spirit, I just thought I should better share with the board, because I don't want it to feel like we do things here and it may cut across anybody or make anything unhelpful or people not know about it. We are tomorrow actually issuing our first integrated fare structure for Greater Manchester, which will integrate bus and tram initially, but then we'll integrate bus, bike and tram in a tap in, tap out system by early 2025. So we've kind of got an interim move that we're announcing tomorrow, and then we'll be moving to the full integrated model then. And interestingly, we are now able to make progress on our Trailblazer, which also will be announced tomorrow, which is around rail starting to plot a path where not all lines, but some lines can start to see how they will fit into the B network in the second half of this decade. So I just mention that in case everyone wondered, well, we were in Manchester yesterday and he didn't say anything, and then look, there's this stuff in the news. Because we are on this journey now and it's quite imminent for us. And I want everyone to be able to speak to TFGM if anybody has concerns about it, because there's many neighbouring authorities around here. The aim with rail particularly is to give access, because obviously many people in Lancashire, Cheshire, Derbyshire are Greater Manchester commuters, and that's their principal journey. And what we're trying to do, obviously, particularly with rail colleagues, is open up the benefits of an integrated capped system to people who travel here but live just outside of our borders and would otherwise drive possibly. So it does have implications beyond our borders, and we fully recognise that, but I just wanted to say that we are open to anybody coming to us and sort of working through any issues or any concerns, because it's it's 3 months away for us now.
Councillor Mayor Burnham, I think one of the things that we've got to take on board is we don't want to reinvent the wheel, and we want to see as wider availability to the population as a whole across the north, because I think it is one of the desperate things that too many different schemes and people don't get to know or understand what is available to them. So that's something I hope we can help do with this work that's being done. Sorry, we've got a couple down here, Hans and Sam first.
Sorry, Sam. Yes, I think the ambition must be to have a buy one ticket to where you want to go to. So if I want to leave Warrington and go to York, I just go and purchase one ticket. What the ambition should be looking at is giving you a suggested route, so with trains, buses, whatever. So here's your one ticket, there's your one price, and this is the suggested route of how to get there. So that's where I think it's leading us to, but it's not quite there yet.
Yes, I too am very supportive of the report, and following on from what Andy said, for an area on the outskirts of Greater Manchester, the integrated ticket system would be wonderful if we could tap into that. I recognise the complexities. It's referred to in the report as a super ticket system. It would be super if we could get into it. Thank you.
Neil?
Thanks. It would be nice to see the old Rover tickets, which the British Railways, which in many cases did integrate transport modes. In Cumbria they covered the ferries often, and sometimes bus services as well. And of course leisure use of the railways and buses has increased considerably since the pandemic, since we came out of the pandemic. That would be very helpful for those travelling in their spare time, but clearly not beneficial to commuters. So I've just got a few points, Chair. I'll just rattle through them as quickly as I can. In terms of demand-responsive transport, this always comes up, and as colleagues and I agreed recently, it seems like the further away one lives from a rural area, the better idea one thinks demand-responsive transport is for the rural area. Actually, experience of the rural areas is that very often it's generalising a bit, but it's often older people who tend to who haven't got access to transport and really want timetable services. So as it says on page 68, that these, if they exist, they're okay if there's something else there. It says they should be connected to services and opportunities, so those services and opportunities need to be there. The basic framework of bus, rail and other services, and obviously economic opportunities, which better transport can obviously facilitate. On page 68, there's a reference to active travel, and we've talked already about active travel, cycling, walking and horse riding being amalgamated into schemes. But we all ought to have concerns that the government's active travel budget was cut by 2/3 in the national budget in the spring of this year. So there'll need to be more thought, I'm sure, as to how active travel is incorporated into journeys. I know a number of local authorities are still persisting with their own schemes. The situation we tend to be facing now is that there's money for the design of schemes, but not always for their actual introduction. Talked about leisure, just a couple more points. 15 to 20 minute neighbourhoods, obviously a great idea, but not particularly relevant to rural areas. But the idea of multimodal hubs is great, again, if there's the adequate structure of public transport to make these realistic, with the active travel at the end. And sorry, these latter points from the draft strategy itself. And Andy did flag up the unsuccessful early attempt by TfN to promote integrated smart transport. One of the reasons why that didn't go ahead was the reluctance of the bus companies to abandon their own existing way of doing things. So that obviously needs to be factored in when we move ahead. I hope we can move ahead with a new initiative. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to touch on Councillor Hughes' point, in my own division, I have a division where there is no bus, chartered bus. There was one before COVID, and that was primarily done through the airport, which was East Mids Airport, a contribution from North East Links Council and a small contribution from LCC. I have residents who are now essentially housebound because the demand service sounds great in principle, but when it's term time or in the morning, that service is taken up by those of a younger generation who need to get about. So actually, they sound brilliant in principle, but actually when you get down to brass tacks and daily use, they're not in a rural area that practical as you alluded to. You touched on 15-minute cities, and I'll touch on it briefly. There, as I'm sure you've seen in Oxford and other places, there is a concern about what that actually means and how that's implemented. And all I'd say is, if you're going to look at that, be very careful how it's implemented, because what a lot of people object to is what was proposed, say, I believe in Cambridge, where it's, if you want to leave X place, you have to tell the council, you have to give them your details, because actually we're supposed to be servants of the people, we're not their masters, we shouldn't be telling them, oh, you can only leave here so many times in a year and you have to give us your number plate. So the principle of having everything within a 20-minute radius, absolutely, that's common sense in an ideal world, but be very careful how it's implemented. It shouldn't be in a draconian manner, as has been reported. Now, whether those reports are accurate, I can't say. I'm not from that authority, but we should certainly make sure that they're not done in the same way, and it's done in a more conciliatory way with the consent of those that are impacted.
Okay, well, thank you all very much for that discussion. I think it shows how important this is now, how widespread it needs to be done, the work that needs to be done on that. And I think the points that Andy has brought in, and I know from earlier conversations with Mayor Coppard as well, that these are very important issues. We do intend at the next board meeting to have a more substantive item on buses and a bigger discussion, because I think that is something which directly affects a lot of people. And we're working on some ideas as to how we perhaps integrate that into our next conference as well next year, as to bus services generally over the area. So that is something we will want to deal with. Is that okay, Matt? Are you clear now that you've got the agreement to move forward and some of the ideas?
Yeah, do you want me to respond to any of those comments at all?
Very briefly, if you will, please, thanks.
I think just firstly to Mayor Burnham on the comments around Greater Manchester, really welcome those. I think the intention behind this strategy is to take the work that's already happening in the north of England and where there's derived evidence from that. And I think the Trailblazer in Greater Manchester is a good example of how we can get sort of learning from that can be scalable to other areas. So really welcome that engagement. I think just picking up in terms of the comments around demand responsive transport in particular, we are in the process of publishing a paper on
on recommendations and lessons learned from some of these schemes, and the intention will be to then translate that into those place-based archetypes. So what are the challenges to, say, ultra-rural areas around demand responsive transport from a commercial point of view, and the mobility hub piece as well. Active travel, again, I think this strategy is more concerned around how active travel is presented to a passenger as a mode of transport, because it's currently sort of separate or not integrated really in those journey planning tools. So how do we make it a viable option for passengers to choose in lieu of some of those systems? And taking the point on the 15 to 20 minute neighbourhoods, I think, again, it's that sort of presentation of how do you show a passenger that these things are within this distance and these options of travel are available flexibly for you to get to those sort of end destinations. On the leisure side of stuff, we benefit that there are existing foundations from a ticketing point of view to start modernising that. I mean, we've got Plus Bus as a potential option. It's not a high-selling product, but there is the infrastructure in play and the fare sets at play already, if those are modernised for onward travel. So those are areas for exploration. I think, unless there was anything particular that I've forgotten, that covered off most of those comments and questions.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Sorry, yes, sorry.
Thanks, yeah. Roy Newton from Cheshire and Warrington Local Enterprise Partnership. One of the key things that we have challenges with in Cheshire and Warrington is recruiting young people. We've got an ageing workforce, and a key difficulty recruiting is in fact lack of public transport as an alternative. One of the things I would like to see as part of the strategy is examples of around where things have been made financially sustainable, because a key element that we've got a problem with is, you know, commercial services aren't generally very financially sustainable, and local authorities just don't have the funding available to continuously support. So I'd like to see some sort of innovative thinking and models around how we might make things self-sustaining.
Okay, thanks, Roy. We'll certainly take that on board. That's a very important point. Okay, Martin.
I was going to say, I know we need to move on and we're running short time, but it would be remiss of me not to make the board aware that you had a report late last year, from Tom Jarvis, our colleague who was doing the work on transport-related social exclusion. That's led to our work on connected communities. I just think your board should be aware, the work on social exclusion was a national award winner last week at the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transportation, and when myself and colleagues were at the National Subnational Transport Body Conference in Birmingham a couple of weeks before that, it is real demonstration of thought leadership. It's setting the agenda, and we're actually using that information feeding into some of the NPR strategic outline business case. So I just think it's worth celebrating success, because it's a fantastic piece of work, and I think I just wanted to recognise Tom's leadership on that, because it is really outstanding.
Indeed, and that was a great award as well. And it is mentioned a heck of a lot around the industry and the wider sphere as well. Okay, can we then move on to item number 9, Peter Cole, on decarbonisation.
Thank you, Chair. So when we published our decarbonisation strategy back in December 21, we undertook to provide updates to partners on our progress against some of the activities defined within it. So the report that we bring to board today has a fuller rundown of what we've been up to and the benefits for partners of those activities. And if I may, I'm going to take that report as read, but just point out a few of the highlights from the past 18 months. We're continuing to work on our hydrogen refuelling for heavy-duty transport workstream, and we're leading that alongside Northern Gas Network. So it's, I think, a good example of taking a systems approach and a cross-sectoral collaboration. We have a number of off-the-shelf tools which are very close to fruition to aid partners with the quantified carbon reduction component of their local transport plan preparation. And in particular, our Clean Mobility Visions tool, which is about evidencing both the carbon but also those wider benefits of modal shift and managing car vehicle mileage. And of course, some activities have deliverables already out there, like our electric vehicle charging infrastructure model and accompanying visualizer. We upped that update that annually to keep it cutting edge, but it's already being used by partners very effectively. But I think probably the most important thing to say is that since our last STP was published back in 2019, and since I joined TFM, the organisation itself has really transitioned to putting decarbonisation at the core of what we do. And so much so, in fact, that the near zero by 2045 target from the decarbonisation strategy forms one of the 3 strategic ambitions within our emerging STP. And that means, as we go forward, we're really aiming to be thought leaders in this area. We want to continue providing those data tools, that evidence, and the advice to partners and the wider stakeholders in the region so that they can continue on their decarbonisation journeys. And we also want to bring that to bear when we can influence government policy where that's appropriate. And I think we've talked about some of that today with our response to RIS. But what next? Well, we'll continue to work on some of the priority activities from the decarbonisation strategy, but we'll also be looking forward to 2025 because it's that time again we need to update our decarbonisation strategy, and we'll be reflecting on the 3 core ambitions within our emerging STP and really focusing on what we need to do as a region in the north to make sure that our decarbonisation transition is as inclusive as possible. So I'd welcome the board's thoughts on the detail within the report, but also on that proposed inclusivity focus for our next decarbonisation strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. That's basically a report to update. Anybody wish to add any comments to that or pursue any questions? If not, that's right. Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to the Rail North Committee report, and Andy has taken over the chairmanship from Liam Robinson, who's moved on to less controversial things, being leader of Liverpool City Council. Andy, do you want to sort of give your thoughts as to the last board meeting that we chaired? It may just, I'm not sure if Andy does know this, but we have got coming at the next board meeting in September, Robin Gisby, who is chairman of OLR, has agreed to come along and sort of talk to us a bit. That will have given him a few months to have settled in with the new arrangements as far as TransPennine is concerned, and I think that'll be an interesting discussion that we can have in September. I'll give him a bit of time to have sorted out. But Andy, across to you.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thanks to colleagues for your support in me taking on this role, which I'm really pleased to do. Following on from Liam, as you say, Liam did a terrific job through difficult times, and I think it's put us in a position where we can now have something of a fresh start, and that's how I tried to describe it at the last meeting of the Rail North Committee. We have both main operators now under operator of last resort. That, I think, gives us as a board and the Rail North Committee the chance to reshape the railways of the North somewhat, and certainly we tried to set that new tone going forward. So it was a positive meeting in that respect. If I could touch briefly, Chair, on the things that I was saying that I think we needed to do now as we move into this new period. We've got to make the case for the railways we've got right now and improve them as much as we can, given there are some risks to rail services in the kind of short term. We've got to argue for the infrastructure that we need, because we still are operating on a reduced timetable in the north. The December 22 timetable is not what we were originally promised. It's much less than we were promised, and we will only get what we were promised as a northern collection of regions when we have the infrastructure across the north, obviously particularly here where we have the problem. And then there's the question of integration that we've been touching on before. How do we get the rail integrated with everything else? So those were the objectives we set. In that regard, if I could just then touch briefly on the specific items that we covered. I should have said, by the way, that Susan Hinchcliffe, Councillor Hinchcliffe, was was appointed as vice chair. There's I think still a vacancy for minority vice chair, but that will hopefully be corrected at the next meeting. The three things we looked at specifically at the last meeting, firstly was operator business plans. Now this is the business plan of both TPE and Northern for 24-25, and that's in development at this moment in time. And we need to keep a very close eye on this, because the financial outlook for the railways, as other areas of life at the moment, is not necessarily the best. But we obviously need to make the point, I think has been made by other colleagues before, in terms of how dependent we are at times in the north on one mode of transport. Disproportionate cuts to services here can have a huge impact on communities. And at the same time, we need to point to, in these discussions, the higher growth that we've seen on the railways here, particularly in the leisure market. You know, high usage of our railways at weekends, reflecting sport and kind of music, culture events that are taking place here and elsewhere across the region. There is the potential for revenue growth, and we mustn't allow a narrative of managed decline of the railways to sink in as part of this process. So we kind of resolved to make those points. One thing that did stand out in the discussions was presentation of some data on the 2022 timetable and reliability since, and I think particularly Northern's reliability, less so TPE given what they've been going through. But as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, Chair, you were there as well, we'd kind of overshot on reliability quite some way, and there was a projection for how that timetable would improve reliability, and it's actually been far more than I think was predicted. I made the point that potentially reflected an overly cautious approach in the 2022 December timetable, i.e. taking lots of services out to get that reliability, but potentially too many. And I know Mayor Coppard rightly has very strong views about Sheffield-Manchester airport connectivity, as do I. So I think we wanted to put a marker down about that. We understand the huge need for reliability, but not at the expense of any services at all for some places, and you know that needs to be factored into the business planning for 24-25, so that we kind of get back to a point of balance where we've got as many services as we can have without jeopardising the reliability of services. If I could then turn to infrastructure and future service development, it was very positive to welcome the Minister, the Rail Minister here recently, who presented a package of works around Manchester Victoria to improve capacity, to ensure that trains do not get delayed in Manchester, and we welcomed that. I think around 72 million pounds of investment, which I say is welcome. However, at the same time, the Department for Transport indicated that it was withdrawing Package C, which, for those who've been on this board a while, has been a long-standing item of discussion, namely being the works that are needed to complete the whole Castlefield corridor from the Ordsall Cord all the way up through Oxford Road to Piccadilly, and Package C had platforms 15 and 16 included, and that is a very long-standing objective of Manchester City Council and indeed our city region, that we need those extra platforms, given that platforms 13 and 14, for those who've used them, are, well, they're like London Underground platforms. You know, they are kind of train after train. They are very congested, very confusing actually for people, and we think a reflection of the lack of capacity that should be there. So this was debated, and it is of, again, some concern that Package C has been removed, although we do understand the reasons why. However, we took the opportunity to make it clear, and members supported this, that platforms 15 and 16 should remain as a future option until such time there is a credible alternative to show how the uplift in trains passing through can be delivered, and it can be shown that there is no need for those extra platforms. We are very sceptical about that, and I just have to make that clear. and hence we are not content for 15 and 16 to be removed completely. They need to remain on the table as an alternative to package C is developed. This does matter to everybody. I just need to keep making this point. This is critical to the reliability of timetables across the north. Until we solve this bottleneck, we're not solving train services anywhere. I particularly made a point in my role as chair to say, and again, looking back towards Sheffield and Mayor Coppard, there does also need to be more focus on Manchester-Sheffield connectivity. We've talked about roads, but rail ain't much better at all. And I think whatever emerges through this process, and it potentially also needs to look towards Stockport as well, it needs to put in place connectivity to support a modern rail service between Manchester and Sheffield, and that can't be missed. You know, overly focused on the Castlefield corridor, missing some of those wider points. And I think I would just want to say, Chair, I think that whole question of Manchester-Sheffield connectivity does need to kind of be nudged up the batting order from a TfN point of view, because it's poor on roads, it's poor on rail. I think the point has already been made by Peter Kellen today that you know, this is the worst connectivity between two major cities probably anywhere in Europe, and it's on our patch. And I think we as an organisation need to start doing more about it. Lastly, if I could just pick up the third major item of discussion, which was the operational update, dominated by TransPennine Express, and I will come to them in a moment. But also we had an update from Nick Donovan, Managing Director of Northern Trains. I think it is important to put on record appreciation of the way, I know there may well still be other issues in parts of the north, but they are significantly better than where they were going back a few years ago. There has been, let's call it, incremental and fairly steady progress on Northern, and I think Nick and his team deserve credit for that. We had a pretty good discussion with him about, I think, your kind of passion, Chair, for a driver training academy for the north, and how we might deliver that within a reformed technical education system, which is certainly something we're looking at here in Greater Manchester, but maybe a multi-site, education provider model across the north. And you know, there was certainly a lot of agreement about that, particularly with Northern. If I could then just finish on TPE, conscious of time. The meeting was shortly after the unanimous call, I should say, cross-party of the Rail North Committee to place TransPennine Express under operator of last resort. I personally believe that was absolutely the right call from the Rail North Committee, and the evidence of that is that in the last week an agreement has been signed with ASLEF on rest day working. And the point was made when we made our call about operator of last resort that there was so many issues had built up between the previous operator and the union that it wasn't possible to even get to rest day working. But there has been that progress already, and that holds out the possibility of services improving throughout the summer, which is good news, I'm sure, for all of us. So the committee, but through it, this board should, I think, celebrate that as the right course of action that we called for, that the government eventually took, but in the end they did, but it did take a while. I think the positive thing, and this was very evident at the meeting, was the impact that Chris Jackson is already making and will continue to make. Chris, for those of you who don't know him, was at Northern and has overseen some of the improvement that we've seen there. We have a high degree of trust in him. He's now fulfilling the role of interim managing director at TransPennine Express. I think the agreement that I just mentioned is in large part down to Chris. So I think it is time for us all to really back him, back what he's trying to do. And for once, I think we've got some positive news there on TransPennine Express, but I don't think things would have turned out quite as in the way that they have were it not for the clear stance taken by the Rail North Committee and by members of this board. So that's, I think, a fairly thorough update, Chair. I'll pass the floor back to you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if anybody wants to come in to that. I mean, I think there was a very good example yesterday of how important the resilience is, where there was a fatality on the West Coast Main Line. So people are having to go up to Sheffield to then get across to Manchester to continue journeys up to Edinburgh and beyond. And you know, if TransPennine had been down as again, it would have been just another day of absolute complete misery for rail passengers. And it's not just a transport for the north issue, it is a resilience issue for the country's rail network that needs to be taken on board. Mayor Coppard.
It's just a short remark really to say, thank you to Andy for kind of focus on the connectivity between South Yorkshire and Greater Manchester. It clearly is a significant issue, not just for our respective city regions, but for the north more broadly. So I'm grateful for the focus and continuing focus of TfN on that corridor. We do need to see improvements, and we do need to see those relatively swiftly, albeit I recognise that is a long-term plan and project that we'll need to work on collectively together. And then also just to echo Andy's comments around the improvements to the TransPennine routes and what we've seen on with Chris Jackson. I'm happy to offer my support to the work that he's doing. I'm glad that the government finally listened to us. I think the work that we did through this group, but also collectively as a group of mayors as well, was really important in getting the government to take that action. And now it's important, I think, that we offer our support for the work that they're doing to improve the network, because it is not an easy challenge, it's not an easy situation they've inherited, and they do deserve our support at this time. Thank you.
Okay, there's no doubt about that. I think the collective voices of the mayors and others have been very important. Can I just make the point that we did earlier in the meeting agree that we'd write to the Department of Transport, just because it comes within rail issues, about Leeds Sheffield study, although it was announced that that's going to be out soon, but also the question of the electrification of the Midland Main Line as well, which was something else that we wanted to sort of raise with the Secretary of State. Peter, you wanted to come in.
Thanks, Chair. Just a very brief comment. Thank you, Andy, for that report, which is more positive than we've had for some time. You mentioned, it is mentioned in the report that the Rail North Committee agreed to re-establish a member working group to look at business planning. Could I just ask that the business voice of TfN in some way is fed into that? I know that we don't want to make these bodies too big, but it would be helpful to feed some business commentary in at the same time. Thank you.
Denise and I and Alison from Cumberland had a good journey down here today on the TransPennine Express, but the real test will be going back, because it's the afternoon's always a lot worse. And I also promised the Lakes Line user group, which obviously is concerned mostly about the line between Oxenholme and Windermere, that I'd flag up the woes they continue to experience, I'm afraid, with Northern. Not to gainsay Andy's comments about some. I know the stats have shown some improvement, as they have in with all the companies that serve the North recently. But they're suffering from entire Northern train diagrams being deleted, presumably to serve other parts of the region, which, okay, there's rationale in that, but it doesn't mean that passengers in our area should be entirely deprived of a service for hours on end. And they also are quite justifiably concerned about the fact that rail track in this instance seem to concentrate their work at bank holiday periods when passenger traffic is busiest in our tourist areas. It happened at Easter. Well, it's not the first time it's happened at Easter. It happened at the May bank holiday as well, and it's scheduled for next year also. And we have tales of hundreds of passengers stranded, trains cancelled at very short notice or at no notice, and last trains, most importantly, failing to run. So I'm not for a minute feeling that the Rail North Committee isn't aware of all of this. But I did say that I would speak up for local people in users in Westbourne First. And finally, and I recognise that Avanti are not covered by Rail North Committee, but they seem to be using shorter trains more regularly. They're already crowded trains, therefore becoming even more crowded. And so if anybody here has the opportunity to dialogue with Avanti and suggest that they should go back to slightly longer trains, that would be greatly to the comfort of passengers. And actually, I was on a train recently back from London where somebody had to sit in the corridor all the way from London to Glasgow, and that is completely unacceptable. So I'm sure we'll continue to make that sort of argument.
Okay, Neil. Rob, you were just going to address quickly.
Well, just address the comment on the disruption at weekend and leisure travel and speak maybe on behalf of the industry and how things are changing. We're conducting a trial just this week where we have closed the East Coast Main Line north of Newcastle. We're doing that during the week, which is unusual for us, so that we can maintain capacity on the East Coast during the weekend. A month ago, we also closed the line south of Doncaster and were diverting via Lincoln during that period. They're two quite pivotal experiments just to make sure we understand the impact and the case of not when we closed during the weekend and during the week. Probably not for the minutes, but I got just as many complaints when we closed during the week from colleagues at Leeds on the East Coast Main Line. So there is never an easy time to close the railway, but I think that the industry absolutely recognises the shift in both the demand and the demand that we need to make it sustainable, which is why we're having the experiment we're doing this week on the East Coast.
I don't suppose you got many complaints from Lincoln. Andy.
Thanks, Chair. Briefly to come back and just follow up on the Avanti point that Neil raised, if I may. Peter, if I could just say to you, yes, if Martin could find a way of feeding some business/LEP input to the business planning process, we're happy to do that. I should have mentioned, particularly to colleagues on the east of the Pennines, when I only focus on infrastructure here, and I don't want it to sound like that as chair, I'm only focusing on issues on west of Pennines. There was considerable frustration expressed, but still the fact that people are waiting for HS2 Leeds area study. And I think that does need to be recognised, that needs to be a call from this board going forward. Neil, on the rural service, I can give you assurance that we will look at rural performance on Northern. Please don't take it that I think it's fine now, because I am aware that there are issues elsewhere, and you've put it over very clearly. So as chair, I will continue to take a look at that issue specifically. But I didn't want to leave this kind of update without touching on Avanti, because we certainly feel here in Greater Manchester there's been another deterioration in the service provided by Avanti West Coast. Cancellations, but also on train, toilets not working, cafeteria not available to people because the card won't work. Short forming, Neil, you just mentioned, it does seem that performance is pretty poor. And one of your colleagues in the House of Lords, Chair, Lord Bethel, was in Manchester yesterday, sent a picture of himself sitting on the floor of an Avanti train heading back to London with some fairly exasperating comments, if I could put it that way. So I think sometimes we've looked in detail at TPE, we've looked in detail at Northern. Avanti, or the West Coast Main Line, is part of our rail services, and I think there are structural issues here that are not being fixed, and this is the most important railway line in the UK. And it can't carry on in the state that it's in, and they've had more than enough time to fix it. And I do think we need, as a board, to send a clear message that we need to look closely at their performance, because it still is not good enough for the major railway line and the service between, obviously, the capital city and Birmingham, the second city. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think that's good. And we do have a feed into Avanti. That is the simple fact of the services it provides. Okay, can we move on then to item number 11, which is communications engagement strategy. Katie?
Thank you, Chair. Very conscious of time, so I'm going to take the paper as read. Really, at this stage, we were keen to get the board's feedback on where the direction of travel for a broader TFN communications and engagement strategy. specifically noting that the context that TfN is operating within has changed, the demand and asks upon us have changed, and we have a new strategic transport plan now that we're consulting on, so we felt it was timely to revisit our strategic communication and engagement objectives and similarly refocus in terms of our priority campaigns for this year. So I was very keen to get any board feedback on those strategic objectives at 3.5 and similarly our priority areas that we've identified at 3.7, which focus on the STP but also focus on the support that we want to be able to give to local transport authorities and other bodies in their planning through the services and capacity and capability that we can provide, and also recognising the role that we can play in terms of driving perhaps campaigns around modal shift, as we've mentioned, Northern Public Transport Week in there, which has been something that we continue to scope following the board steer to us last year. I shall leave it there, Chair.
Apologies, I was intending to raise this at AOB, but it feels like a maybe a more appropriate moment because it's something I raised at the Rail North Committee, which is simply along the lines of pointing to the diversity or lack of around the table. And so I'm very conscious as I look around this table that there is a distinct lack of diversity. There is not a brilliant gender balance. I recognise how difficult that can be, given that essentially we are a collection of elected representatives in the large part. But I would say that as a result of the lack of diversity here, and I would welcome any kind of reflections from TfN in due course about how we might address some of that more broadly. But I think in terms of an engagement strategy, trying to at the very least rectify some of that in the way in which we engage intentionally specific parts of our communities who are particularly underrepresented here on this board and in this room would I think be no bad thing. So if I could just ask for that to be particularly taken away, please, and then maybe at a future meeting some reflections from TfN about how we might address that situation more broadly and in the longer term. I think that would be no bad thing.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a valid point. I think with some of our open consultations, we are very much minded of that and move forward on that. But you're absolutely right. Sam and then Peter.
So I support these three main focuses for priority campaigns in section 3.8, particularly the third one. It says to drive behaviour change. I might change that to say nudge behaviour change. But there are two, I accept the point if you make your travelling by car easier, because that's where you put your resources, then people will travel by car. If you put your resources into public transport and make it easier to travel by public transport, then that's what people will do. But actually, it was embarrassment that made me choose my mode of transport today. Although I've got an electric car, I would have been embarrassed to have driven in. So I came by train, and cycling to the station took me no time at all. The reason for that is the health benefits of cycling are such that for every minute you spend cycling, you increase your lifespan by a minute. So looking at my lifespan as a whole, cycling to the station took me no time at all. So I do want to stress the importance of the publicity campaign. We can nudge behaviour change.
Thanks for that, Sam. I'm not quite sure I've worked that out yet, but you'll have to explain it to me afterwards. Did it take you twice as long to cycle, but you've got an extra 10 minutes as a result of it? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying, well, it took me 15 minutes to cycle to the station, but my lifespan will extend by 15 minutes as a result of the health benefits of cycling to the station. So therefore, looking at my lifespan as a whole, it took me no time.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much indeed. Mark. Peter. Peter, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the focus on one voice for the North. One of the key strengths of this body is the fact that we have business representation and political representation giving one voice. So I would like to just say that it's felt a little bit uncomfortable as a business representative from time to time, because we don't have, like we have a vice chair or chair representing business. So when you're trying to do communications, it's difficult to ask who for a quote. So can we just, as part of the strategy, try and establish a little bit more formality on that, to maybe through MP11 or with some other body, somebody who can give those business quotes without sort of it appearing to be just one part of the North that's speaking. Thanks.
Definitely take that on board.
Absolutely, Peter, and we've had separate conversations, so we'll take that away. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the outline of your strategy, Katie. Pleased to see that there is reference to economic in there. Could I just make a plea again, and I do repeat this a lot, I know, but in every communication that we send out, can we also make the linkage to infrastructure improvement, transport infrastructure improvement as a driver and enabler of economic growth, because it adds legitimacy to everything that we say. So again, apologies for repeating that all the time, but I do think we need to reference it. Thank you.
Definitely, and there's no need to apologise for making sure that we stay constant on those kind of messages. Okay, that's been useful conversation, and I think something for us to bear in mind over the forthcoming couple of months. If we can move now on to governance report. Julie, do you just want to very quickly take us through this, where we've just got to change the weighted votes, I understand?
Yes, please, Chair. I hope I can take the report as read. It's self-explanatory and hopefully requires no further expansion. There's just one fairly minor but important amendment I need to point out. On the weighted votes, we've established that Cumberland and Westmoreland and Furness are in fact entitled to 2 board votes each rather than the 1 and 2 as printed. We've reviewed this, we've given the appropriate attention to the need to round up where a resulting number is not exact. So I'd therefore like to invite members to treat recommendation 213 as though it states an allocation of 2 votes each for board and general purposes committee for those authorities. Other than that, I commend the recommendations to you, Chair. Thank you.
With that, can we take that as agreement? Thank you very much indeed. Can I thank everybody for attending? I think we've covered, we've had some very useful discussions this morning right across the whole transport board, I think, as far as both road and rail and also active travel as well. So I think there's not an area that's not been covered this morning. Our next meeting is on the 27th of September at 10:30 in Leeds, where we will have a report back then on what's been going on as far as strategic transport plan is concerned, but also, as I say, there'll be some items on bus and bus usage as well, and other items